You are living in the most dangerous time in American history.
We won't take a single back step.
Former professional basketball player is now the Republican Party's choice.
Can you imagine Royce White, the U.S. Senate?
White won the endorsement on May 18th with 67% of the vote.
There's nothing that guarantees we win, but I guarantee you if we lose, we will die.
Can you tell me what made you want to run for political office? What was the original reason that you wanted to do that?
Well, we live in a scary time in this country, but really in the world as a society. People like their BS, stuffed with BS and wrapped in BS to avoid dealing with the truth. And I'm a person who's always sought to find the truth and then, if need be, speak the truth at my own detriment. And that's what we need in American politics. So that was really the driving force for why I decided to get involved in politics. And this was back in 2022.
Why politics specifically? I mean, there's many ways to address issues. There's many. Before you were more in the activism world. What made you say politics, and specifically the office you're running for, is the way to do it?
Well, I think governance is important, and I think a lot of the activism work that is done is oftentimes undermined by what our politicians and our government do, because regulation is king, right? I mean, at bottom of a lot of the initiatives that, let's say, come from the nonprofit world or even, let's say, the humanitarian private sector still have to adhere to regulation. And a lot of our regulation, a lot of our policy, a lot of our governance is undermining everything that aims to bring us well-being and prosperity, which I know firsthand from being one of the early trailblazers in the mental health conversation and that policy debate I had with the NBA.
I want to take it back for a second, to the beginning of this, when we started with you in 2020, right?
Yeah.
So tell us first, what were you doing in 2020? And what has changed since then? I don't necessarily mean about your views,
right,
although maybe that too.
Yeah.
Just in general in your life, where were you at in 2020, and what has shifted or changed since then?
Well, in 2020, I was on the front line of one of the most controversial situations in American history, and that was the George Floyd death and the subsequent protests or riots or conversations that took place in the wake of it. And I was at the front line of leading peaceful protests, mostly in response to watching our city catch fire, specifically the south side of Minneapolis, which is a community near and dear to my heart. I grew up on the south side of Minneapolis on many hot summers, playing basketball, hanging out with friends, and so on and so forth. So it was hard for me and some of those individuals who also grew up in that neighborhood or in neighborhoods like it across the Twin Cities to see black businesses being burned down, to see the local community there being afflicted so heavily by the emotion, the chaos. And I thought an appropriate response, the right way to lead, was to organize peaceful demonstrations. But not only organize peaceful demonstrations that sought to educate the people who would be attending. So it wasn't just an off-gas event, a sort of false catharsis. And a lot of times that's what activism and rallies and all this other kind of political theater becomes. It's just an off-gas of all of our built-up resent and contempt for a system we know is crushing us and scamming us, but we don't necessarily understand how to affect that. The way to do that in 2020 was to talk about the way the money works, talk about corporate culture, talk about a global corporate community, talk about government policy, and specifically monetary policy, which is why I led every George Floyd protest to the Federal Reserve and not to the first precinct there down in downtown Minneapolis.
Is this in some ways where you diverge from Black Lives Matter? Because I know that you've made a point, and you don't like when people conflate what you were doing with Black Lives Matter. And
Right.
So I want to talk about.
Well, I was never.
Yeah.
I was never affiliated with Black Lives Matter. I never have been in my life. Other than I would agree with the general term that Black lives do matter. I mean, I think most people would. It'd be pretty inhumane to say anything else. But obviously, I'm a black man. I'm a black man living in America. I understand the historical context of racism. I understand some of the current context of racism. In fact, in 2016, I was held at gunpoint by 7 police officers in the Roseville, Falcon Heights area on mistaken identity. And afterward, I didn't get anything but a handshake and we apologize because you're not the guy we're looking for, which I knew when the stop first occurred. But you could die in situations like that. That is one of the fundamental flaws of policing, and you could say the freedom of being a citizen in this country. Bad stuff does happen. It shouldn't happen, and there should be accountability when and if it happens. But I've never been affiliated with Black Lives Matter. In fact, Black Lives Matter was just starting when I fought the NBA on mental health policy in 2012. And 3 years before that, or 2 years before that, when I first started to talk about mental health in the public, Black Lives Matter didn't even exist. And I only point that out to say, when George Floyd died, the group that we assembled to organize these independent protests, or let's say the group that we assembled, the group of black men that came together to organize these peaceful protests had no affiliation with Black Lives Matter either, other than some casual, loose affiliation with the term. But the actual organization itself, we were never a part of, and I've never been involved with any time in my life. So I wouldn't say I diverged from them as so much as we were never, on the same side of the football. And
how about in your personal life? And what has changed since 2020? What has, since those days, what is different in your life?
Well, everything. Since 2020, I mean, everything's different. I mean, I'm the first Senate nominee. I'm the first Senate nominee in this country to be born in the 1990s, which you could look at as a significant milestone or mark in time for a change of the guard in American politics. And I'm very proud of that. And it's changed my entire life. A lot of different things to consider. I'm trying to be more careful with the things that I'm saying while still telling the unadulterated truth people need to hear. But everything's different.
Walk me through some of that a little bit more.
Okay.
What's different, not just in your professional, but in your personal life?
I mean, nothing's really different in my personal life. In my personal and family life, since I was 21 years old, my family and the people that are closest to me have watched me push back against the status quo of our country and our politicians and our corporate elites. The first year that I was able to legally drink, I was in that fight. So, my personal life as an adult has always been geared around standing up for the people and speaking uncomfortable truths that can help move this country and her people forward. So nothing's really changed in my personal life in that regard, other than my children that were born, when I was 21 are now getting into grade school, into junior high and almost on their way to high school as well. So, that's always fun to see your kids grow up and become teenagers. But other than that, nothing significant has changed in my personal life or with my personal views.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So people from the outside, again, I know that you were not affiliated or associated with Black Lives Matter, but
Right.
From the outside, they see now somebody that's on the Republican ticket, and then they see what the 10K Foundation,
Right.
And the default assumption will be that this is like a 180.
Yeah.
Views.
Well, that's what the mainstream media wants people to see.
Yeah, so let's talk about
Yeah.
that.
No, the mainstream media has tried to paint me out to be a Black Lives Matter activist solely to discredit me and, sort of show me as a flip-flop. But that's not true at all. There are issues that transcend the common conversation about policing and race in this country. There are topics and there are systems of governance and institutions that greatly transcend that argument. And I'm not saying that's not a legitimate argument or it's not one that deserves our attention, but what I am saying is there are things that are just as, if not significantly more important when it comes to the way that our country is run and who's running it. Which is why in 2020 I led people to the Federal Reserve, and the mainstream media didn't cover that at all. And it really was the most significant, it was one of, if not the most significant things that happened during 2020. Because never in American history, to my knowledge, has a young black professional athlete led a protest of thousands of people to the front door of how the money works and the significance of the Federal Reserve as an institution. It's never happened in this country. There are many people who have led protests to the Federal Reserve in general, let alone somebody who was in my position as a community leader, you could say. I'm not saying that I am or was, but that's what the media described it as. And they knew where we were. They knew where we were. They know what the Fed is. They know what it does. They know the power it carries. They know the effect it has on your average American working class citizen, and even more so the poor. They know what inflation is. And so you can't look at the lack of coverage during 2020 after George Floyd died in me taking people to the Federal Reserve as anything other than intentional.
I want to explore that because you know, it sounds like your relationship and your outlook towards the media is one that it's almost like you're implying that there's an intentionality in the way they cover things, almost like an agenda.
Sure.
And I want to talk about that. First of all, what is the agenda and why? What's from your perspective?
Well, the agenda is to maintain the status quo. The status quo of corruption. Now, it's okay to talk about problems. It's okay to talk about policing, or it's okay to talk about the unequal distribution of resources. It's okay to talk about a lot of things. But if you actually brush up against trying to change it, if you actually identify the institutions and how they work, and you tell people that, you give people that knowledge, or let's say if you have enough of a platform or presence to really draw enough people to want to change those circumstances, then you're persona non grata. And it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. This isn't about Democrats or Republicans. This is about how the system comes together to move itself forward, to preserve itself. And the mainstream media has aided and abetted that preservation of a corrupt status quo to a point where I was unable to stomach it any longer. And I experienced that firsthand in the NBA. See, my contempt for the mainstream media goes well before Trayvon Martin was killed. My contempt for the mainstream media was being drafted to the NBA, a National Basketball Association that had a collective bargaining agreement with no mention of mental health in it whatsoever. Yet they had a completely flushed out banned substance list, right? Banned substance program that also included anti-anxiety medication, which I was prescribed for. Xanax is the brand name, but all benzodiazepines as a class. And they are a drug that is often misused for recreational purposes, highly addictive, dangerous, kills a lot of people. But the question wasn't whether or not it deserved to be on the banned substance list. The question was, why does the banned substance list exist? Which acknowledges that mental health is a real field of study in health, but you have no mention of it in your collective bargaining language. I raised that question at 21 years old. And the NBA, and for lack of a better response, the NBA basically said, yeah, he's right, but he's not the one to be able to bring this topic forward. What does that say? What did they mean by that? That I wasn't the one. At 21 years old, what had I done so bad in my life that I was unable to or expected not to speak this very, very obvious truth about the way that the NBA was structured? Well, the reason why is because the NBA is a global watering hole for a much broader corporate community. And the entire corporate community hadn't sorted out what they really felt about mental health as a topic. And it's not mental health. When we say mental health, people get this idea of anxiety and depression and maybe drug abuse or substance abuse, addiction or PTSD, or now it's, clinical narcissism or whatever you want to call it. But when people think of mental health, they don't think of it as the human condition. That crossroads, that intersection where mind, body, and spirit converge and give us what we experience as a consciousness, you could say. That is really the cornerstone of what I mean when I say mental health. And I think that's what the mental health conversation is really trying to speak to. And it's a confusing place in there. It's complex. It's not easy. But the answer is never to ignore it. And the simplest thing that could have happened back during my fight with the NBA was them come out and say, you know what, for whatever reason, if it was a genuine oversight, for whatever reason, we don't have language in our collective bargaining agreement, and it's necessary that we get some, and we certainly don't want to castigate or sort of exile Royce from a basketball career because he pointed this out and because he was willing to fight for it. In fact, then TV analyst Steve Kerr, now multiple-time NBA champion coach and currently won a gold medal for the USA team as the coach, he supported me back then. He came out publicly in the USA Today article and said, I respect what he's doing and the people he's trying to help. Yet the mainstream media never really featured the fight between me and the NBA. If you go back and you read all the headlines, what came out of it was Royce is afraid to fly. And that's why his NBA career is going to inevitably be shortened. Everybody knew that wasn't true. We don't like our athletes to go to certain places. We don't like our athletes to talk about certain things. We don't like our athletes to push certain boundaries and challenge certain norms. And so when I experienced the mainstream media do that, it opened my mind to question what the mainstream media functions as in totality.
I want to ask you about something else you had just said a few moments ago. You said that some of these broader issues that you're getting at now, some of the deeper stuff, it transcends party politics, it transcends Democrat, Republican. But then, you did ultimately get the nomination from the Republican side. So clearly there must be something that they're doing that you feel more in line with. And I do wonder, what is that difference that makes you feel like addressing those broader issues is more appropriate from the Republican platform?
Well, first I'll say that I'm not completely satisfied with the Republican Party platform, because I don't think that many of the Republicans in the Republican Party structure, hierarchy, not the voters. Many Republicans that run the party all across the country don't really believe in the Republican fundamental ideas or philosophy either. They don't believe in the idea of republicanism. There's a conservatism that took over the party, and then there was a mainstream conservatism and neoconservatism that took over the party. The MAGA movement, by my estimation, and certainly as I'm involved with it, is to try and return the Republican Party or that movement of American politics back to the more fundamental philosophy of republicanism. And if you get back down to that fundamental philosophy, you see the stark difference between the two parties quite clear. And they can put whatever cultural wedge issues out in front of you they want, and I understand them well. Again, mental health is kind of one of them. It's a subgroup, but it kind of undergirds all three. It's Black Lives Matter, women's rights, and the LGBTQ. And those are the three cultural wedge issues that are put up on the table for everybody to focus on and argue about. But the real fundamental difference between the Republican Party and Democrat Party are the scope of government, right? One party, at least in theory, says that they want to shrink and limit the size and scope of the government. The other party always advocates for the infinite expansion of the federal government or government writ large. And I believe in limited government. I mean, as a black man in this country, how could you believe in the expansion of the same system that you say is oppressive?
I want to ask about that actually. With the Epoch Times, the interview you had, you said black identity is used as a way to expand in a way that I'm guessing you don't agree with. But then the
black and the Jewish identity are used the same way.
And so I want to know, because he didn't give you much of a chance to elaborate on that.
Thank you.
So I wanted to kind of ask about
flesh that out.
Yeah, what does that mean?
Well, since the days of slavery and then post-segregation, after the Civil Rights Act was passed, the thinking is that if the government doesn't expand, if social programs don't expand, then black people will inevitably fall victim to a country that started from a place of inequality and hatred. That is the pitch. That is the selling point of the expansion of the federal government, and it's what the Democrats have used ad nauseum to gain or garner the blind support of the Democrat Party from black people. That the only way to protect you from white supremacy or to go back to slavery is if we make the federal government so big that it can protect every last one of you. But it hasn't done that. And my point in saying that it's used the same as the Jewish identity at a global scale is used to justify the expansion or the ambition of world government. And that's not a conspiracy theory, it's not conjecture. The cornerstone of the United Nations and all the other, or most of the other, global government collaboratives is based on the Holocaust and World War II as a cultural narrative. And it offends me. It offends me for black people, and it offends me for Jewish people. Many Jewish people in my life that I love, I consider family. And I'm a Christian, so I consider Jesus Christ to have been a Jew by scriptural evidence, right? But it offends me that the identities are used this way. And the Jewish one even more so, because the Jewish identity is used to say anybody who believes in borders is on their way to becoming a fascist or a Nazi. That's how it's used. Anybody who says that they're a nationalist is ultimately in opposition to the great tragedy that Jews faced in Nazi Germany. And I reject that. I reject that wholly. I reject that in the most current context. Go on up to Canada and try and cross the border without documentation and live there. Go on down to Mexico and try and cross the border without documentation and live there. Go try and board a flight to China or anywhere else in the world. Mumbai. Go try and board a flight to Mumbai without proper documentation or a passport. They're not letting you live there. You can't just cross their border. You get shot and killed anywhere else in the world for crossing a border without proper documentation. But Americans who believe in having a border are Nazis because of World War II, because of what Hitler did. And by my standards, Adolf Hitler wasn't a nationalist. He was a globalist.
I want to jump into this a little deeper,
Okay.
Because one of the things Trump talked about in this last debate, and I'm guessing campaigns as well, is that immigration is taking, black and Latino jobs. That's one of his arguments, is that we don't limit immigration. We're going to. So how do you feel about that? The concept.
I think he's 100% right. Yeah, I think he's when Donald Trump says that illegal immigration is having a heavy toll on black and Latino jobs, he's 100% correct. And it's not necessarily about the one-to-one employment of a job that an illegal immigrant is willing to work versus a job that your average black person or Latino in America is willing to work. That's not the point. It's the mechanism of unfettered illegal immigration that displaces the entire economic system. See, they don't want young black men, especially young black athletes, to even talk about things at this depth. That's partly why the impulse and latent racism of the liberal-run mainstream media rejected that I would challenge the NBA on a political basis. And when I say political in that sense, I mean on policy. There's a certain thing that gets uncomfortable anytime the conversation gets this technical. Okay, but then don't call me crazy. All right, let's just say we don't want to go there. I can live with that. If everybody in this country decides on November 5th, we just don't want to go there, fine, you get the government you deserve, and by God, you will. But if we want to get technical, the American people are getting hit over the head 3 times, they're getting taxed 3 times. And this all goes back to the post-World War II democratic liberal order. This is the fundamental geopolitical philosophy that still runs our entire geopolitical thinking today. Everybody that was a part of the restructuring of the global economy after World War II with the Bretton Woods Conference and the inception of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund and other organizations like it, the World Economic Forum. Henry Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski, Klaus Schwab, they were involved in these ideas. And they've been very successful in that the entire world has bought into it. But what has it done for America? I'll tell you. What it's done for America is quite simple. First, we take our dollar and we export our dollar to a country we trade with. Then our military has to go there because wherever our US dollar is, our military is now obligated to defend its national interests. Our national interest, our greatest national interest, is actually our currency because it's our #1 export. So now our military goes there. So now not only have we sent certain jobs from certain industries and certain markets to another country that takes them away from Americans. Now we subsidize it by our taxpayer paying for our military to go and manage another outpost. And then we allow warlords, despots, autocrats, or whoever else is favorable for our strategic interest to oppress the people that we're partnered with. To oppress the people we say we were going to defend, right? Because remember, the post-World War II Democrat liberal order's mantra or mission was that we're going to take freedom and democracy all around the world through military means, if necessary, to make people self-determining. But these people who live under these despots and warlords and autocrats, they can be oppressed because it's better for our strategic interests. So now they leave their country for whatever reason. And they make it to our border and they get to come across our border and live in our communities, and we have to pay for that too? We're taking a hit on the price of goods, right? We're taking a hit on the price of goods because we've sunk the manufacturing in our own country and offshored it. And now we're trading with these companies on a manufacturing need basis, an essential goods basis. Then we send our military, which has to be subsidized. Then when their people come to our border, we have to take them in and pay. The American citizen, the American working class is getting raped so much. I want to give them a whistle. I want to give them a giant whistle. It's an infamia. The only thing that I can think of is that the entire mandate for the mainstream media under the surface is to quell the rightful animosity that your average American would have for how bad they're getting scammed.
I'm going to go a little deeper into this in a minute, but I do want to, before I lose track of it, I want to go to people like Tayo and other people from the 10K Foundation. And the reason I'm bringing them up is I don't know them, but I have some ideas that in some circles, when you talk about the things you're talking about, you might have some people that disagree with, that are not on the same page as you.
No.
Is that so? Does Tayo, for example, has he? So let me just ask you this way: how have people reacted?
Every time I'll say this: every time I see Tayo, it's handshakes and hugs and love, and it will most likely always be. Now, if Tayo holds some deep philosophical disagreement with what I'm saying, let him call me and step up and challenge it. But mostly what has happened with me over the course of my adult life is that I've read into things, I've studied things, I've experienced things that give me a perspective and advantage where the most people will say is that they don't fully understand what it is I'm talking about because they don't know enough. So I never get people who go, what you're saying is not right, it's wrong, it's a lie, you're full of it. Refute something that I'm saying. I mean, I'm not saying Tayo, because Tayo's my boy. I mean, we're family. And he's never really challenged anything I'm saying. In fact, I think I talked to him a couple of weeks ago and he says, man, I appreciate you keep pushing and fighting and telling the truth. But for anybody else out there, refute the things I'm saying.
Has it, I'm only...
And I haven't run into that, I want to say.
Yeah, and
I haven't run into people in my personal life who call me up and go, what you said on such and such is completely wrong. I don't agree with it. And there's something to be said for that. Because I know there are a lot of people out there that disagree. I'm not saying that they're not out there, they don't disagree. What I'm saying is if you sit down and you listen to me fully explain the position of my political platform, you got to be pretty well informed to bring an argument or a debate, to refute it. I'm not talking about it's anything other than Donald Trump. I'm voting for Kamala Harris because it's progress that a black woman would be the president. I mean, anybody could do that, but people wouldn't call me with that because I don't talk in those terms. I talk in the terms of how things actually work. So if you don't know how things actually work, you wouldn't call me and argue it.
Even on a superficial level, and the only reason I bring up Tayo's name is because he's the only one I know of. But
Right.
But have you lost friends, acquaintances, just on that superficial level of, you support Trump, okay, you're on the GOP ticket. Has that caused any friction for you?
Not a friction that I would readily be able to identify. No, the running as a Republican, running as an America First or MAGA candidate, supporting Donald Trump has not caused me any significant change in my personal relationships. In fact, if anything, I've found out how many people agree with some of the things that I otherwise wouldn't have known that they thought, right?
Have you found that there's certain people that agree with you in private that might not be willing to say so in public?
Oh, for sure. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of people that would agree with me in private that won't say it publicly, for the very reasons I mentioned. You know, just like with the NBA, if you go and you challenge them publicly, even if you're right, we live in a country that has this heresy of democracy. And I'm not talking about democratic process like how the government is structured or how it's decided on. I'm talking about cultural democracy, right? What is right by consensus of a majority? Majorities aren't always right, and they're definitely not made equal. So just because a lot of people think a thing or agree with a thing, like let's say American corporations, that if you are an employee and you publicly challenge your employer, like the NBA, you're seen as more of a threat than a good or a necessary progress. There's a lot of people who live under that pressure. There's a lot of people who lived under that pressure in 2021, 2022, when the NBA was mandating that people get vaccines, like Kyrie Irving. And Kyrie Irving said, wait a second, I don't believe in that. I'm not okay with that. And the entire mainstream media came down on him with a 1,000-pound anvil, only for a year or two later, us to totally rethink and restructure and rework the way that we talk about vaccines now in the media. But he suffered the cost of that. And if nothing else, it was the cost that if you agreed with him, you probably didn't say it too loud. And if you didn't agree with him, you had to double and triple it down on your position for how it would benefit you with the circles of power.
I want to run back because I think I cut into your audio a little bit. You said, I haven't had anyone like close relationships change. Can you just say that one more time just so we get the clean audio?
Yeah, I haven't had any close personal relationships change drastically because of my run here or my candidacy or my support of Donald Trump.
Do you admire or feel inspired by Donald Trump? And if so, why or why not?
Do I feel inspired by Donald Trump? Yeah. I mean, when a man takes a bullet for the country and stands up and says to continue to fight, and he goes on about being the president or running for president on the platform that he is, yeah, that's inspirational. But well before he ever took a bullet, he was speaking an uncomfortable truth. And everybody knows it. I mean, and again, that is not about being Republican or Democrat, or at least it shouldn't be. The malignant nature of special interest money and lobbying in DC has turned it into a swamp. That is a fundamental fact. If you deny it and you want to live in that delusional fantasy, you have a right as an American citizen, obviously. We don't want to set up any Minority Report type weird dystopian scenarios where I can force you to deal with reality. I don't want to do that. Can't do it. It's not American. But it is a fact. DC has turned into a swamp, and Donald Trump was one of the first politicians to deviate from that cultural norm. That the steady hands of DC. What I mean by the steady hands is the people you can count on in a crisis to do the wrong thing regardless of the moral implication. The steady hands of DC and the underbelly of DC had a long run of consistent and willing participation from American politicians. He was one of the first people to say, wait a second, Hillary, how dare you talk about the tax code? All of your donors use the tax code, and you would never mention that in public, but in private, you may know it. Now with Hillary, I don't think that she would even really talk about it much in private because that's just how dishonest she is. But she certainly wasn't going to talk about it in public. And I think there's everything to be said for that. I don't think that's a casual or small thing. I think the mainstream media has tried to mitigate the significance of Donald Trump calling out the money in politics. And if you look at politicians who have gotten to American politics since Donald Trump's arrival on the scene or shortly before, most politicians get wealthier when they go into politics. They don't lose money. So show me the politicians that lost money and I'll show you the winners. I'll show you the winners morally, ethically, as history will judge. Maybe not in elections. And I'm not saying that he lost the 2020 election. And I'm not saying that he's going to lose in 2024. But what I'm saying is to measure winning and losing based on the outcome of competition is not always the right vantage.
Let's talk about the 2020 election. You said you're not saying he lost the 20.
Right.
What do you feel is behind that? I mean, I'm genuinely curious what, like, when you say he potentially didn't lose the election, is that literal in terms of the actual votes, or in the kind of the spirit of things? What does it mean?
I think there was fraud in the 2020 election. I think there was verifiable fraud in the 2020 election. You can't tell me otherwise. In fact, when I made the decision to go into politics, the party line and mainstream narrative on the security of elections was a huge reason why. Because for me, as a young black man, a young free black man in this country, one of the greatest things that grinds my gears is when people try and insult my intelligence. And it's an insult to my intelligence to say, in 2018, when Amy Klobuchar criticized the security of the elections, it's completely okay. When Amy Klobuchar says that the machines are able to be hacked, it's completely okay. When Donald Trump says it 24 months later, it's off limits. Don't insult my intelligence this way. And there are a lot of American citizens out there who now support Donald Trump or are going to support Donald Trump for the first time based on that insult to our intelligence. Because again, American citizens are thought to be stupid by your political industry and in tandem mainstream media, right? That's not something they say with the product that they bring you, but in all the marketing meetings and in all the control groups behind the scenes and behind closed doors, it's a foregone conclusion that your average American citizen has a low attention span and doesn't know or read up on the information that they should to have a good grasp of whatever it is they think, right? And they're mostly undereducated. All of which happened, by the way, under the presiding, governing elite class that runs stuff today, right? I mean, that's kind of the gaffe, is if the mainstream media, or let's say the permanent political class in this country thinks that the American people are stupid, they have some verifiable proof because they were involved in doing it. Right? So when you tell me that in 2018 I'm so stupid, I can listen to Amy Klobuchar say the machines can be hacked, that the machines are a problem, and then in 2020 all of a sudden we say that that's completely off limits. I mean, what do you take me for?
But then the question becomes, if you have an election where half the country, roughly, thinks it's a legitimate election, and I mean, this happened with George Bush too, right?
Yes, it did.
In 2000. So, and half the country is thinking this is a rigged election, and then now you have assassination attempts. How do we step? And especially, I'm asking you because you're trying to enter into the political arena. Mm-hmm. How do we step back from this brink? How do we bring it back to something that looks like normalcy? And what would you do as a politician that will break this paradigm? That will kind of get us to a place that's more functional.
We're a long way from functional, and I'm not going to make any false promises in that regard because it would be dishonest. But the part of the lack of functionality of our American political system and our American culture writ large is people's desire to have BS, wrapped in BS and stuffed with BS rather than confront the truth. The truth is that our elections are insecure. Our elections do have fraud. And it used to be that when you look at a question of would somebody do something corrupt or fraudulent or commit a crime, you first ask about motive. Well, there's so much motive to rig elections, it's almost unbelievable that there isn't fraud because the motive is just so heavy. And so the first thing I think is American politicians and American media and whatever other American leaders need to be able to say that without the fear of retaliation from their employers, from financial institutions, from the courts. We should be able to say, doesn't there seem to be a lot of motive to rig elections? Of course there is, on both sides of the aisle. I'm not saying the rigging of elections solely happens on the Democrat side. In fact, if I was to be more honest, I'd say that the uniparty of Republicans and Democrats probably work in some conjunction to rig elections together. And that's even scary. See, we're even willing to accept that there may be some rigging, but we like the two-team approach where we can get on one side or the other and go, if the rigging is to our benefit, then let it happen. We'll take the win. It's kind of like if a ref is calling the game in your direction during a basketball, to calling the game in your direction in basketball, you look at it and go, oof, that was a bad call with the other coaches on the sideline. I'm a coach now. But when you go back to the locker room afterward, you think, we'll take it. That's kind of how American politics is. And that's kind of how our entire culture is as Americans. And we have to change that. But that's a crisis of leadership. And leaders have to be able to stand up and question these things. And if they can, then we can start to figure out how do we walk ourselves back to a functional place as a country and as a culture.
And you are running for a position of fairly high leadership.
Consequence.
Yeah, fairly high consequence in leadership. And my question then is, one, first and foremost, what is your platform? And two, what are you going to do different from like the permanent political past that you described?
Well, I am running for a position of significant consequence. If I win, I'll be the youngest United States Senator in the Senate, and I'll be the first one born in the 1990s. I'm already the first black person to be endorsed or nominated for United States Senate in the state of Minnesota's history, which on any other occasion for the liberal mainstream media, by the way, would be a milestone worth unquantifiable amounts of coverage, yet it never gets mentioned. But my platform is simple. I'm not a liar, and I don't sell out. I've never been a sellout. When the NBA told me the mental health problem was a real problem and it deserves us to pay attention to it in policy, but you'd be much better positioned to leverage your career to make that change happen. I told them they could take the career and the money, and we'll play the long game. And they told me, who's going to listen to you? I remember being behind closed doors with some NBA officials. I won't even say their names because it's not about that. But the message was, who's going to listen to you if you don't play? They had already calculated that. They were already banking on the fact that your average American citizen looks up the name Royce White and they think to themselves, that's the guy who was too scared to fly. Not the guy who was willing to sacrifice his life, his childhood lifelong dream and pursuit of a professional basketball career and whatever comes with it. Not a guy who was willing to sacrifice that just to tell a single insignificant truth that most people may not pay attention to anyway. That's not how they want to paint me. So my platform is simple. I'm not a liar, and I've proven it. And I'm not a sellout, and I've proven that. If you're talking about more policies, border debt forever wars. Our country is bankrupt. Close our border, stop these wars. In these wars, we can't afford either. Border, debt, forever wars. If you want to encapsulate that in something more simple, America first.
I want to ask about your platform on a specific issue that relates, of course, to 2020, which is policing.
Yes.
defund the police movement. Even some people were saying abolish the police. When you hear, I'm not saying you said any of those things. I have no knowledge of what you think, which is really what I'm asking.
Right.
What did you think then? What do you think now? And when you look at those movements, let's say more the defund the police, because I think abolish was a more fringe kind of approach. But the defund the police, how do you see that, especially having been so involved with
Black
protests? Yeah.
It's tough to, I feel the same way now I did then, in large part. I feel that, but again, the mainstream media didn't really give me a chance to explain myself. And the circumstance of the time didn't really give me a good chance to explain myself in great depth either. You're still working off of the knowledge that most people don't have the attention span or the desire to talk about things at a deep level, right? So, there was an entire phenomenon of people after George Floyd died that just came out to protest and rally for the photo op, to be able to post it on Instagram, in whatever skimpy clothing or whatever revolutionary clothing they thought looked cool, whatever. It was like a fad for some people, not for everybody, but for some people. So to think that you could get through to those people about deep issues is really a lofty ambition. But I feel the same way now I felt then, that policing has a lot of challenges, obvious, some self-inflicted, some responsibility on the citizens. In fact, probably more responsibility on the citizens than the police. Now, how you differentiate the two is that the police have the authority of the law of the land. And with it comes a greater responsibility. If you don't believe that, then you don't really believe in the idea of justice, because we hold our politicians and our people who hold elected office to a higher standard of integrity. That's just simple, right? We want our president to behave with more integrity than we would do your average crack dealer on the corner. I mean, that's just common sense, really. It should be, at least. So there is an onus on policing to do their job to the best of their ability. The problem is that our corporate culture, again, to go back to our corporate community, our leading financial institutions, many of our politicians, this permanent political class, they've all made a calculated assessment of how much chaos and violence is going to be accepted in exchange for the unfettered growth of companies, political power, economic imperialism, right? So what we end up doing is we end up throwing all of our cultural decay into the hands of the police.
So basically, what we were talking about is
defund the police.
Yeah.
Abolish the police.
Looking back at 2020, where do you stand?
Where do I stand today on policing?
As a politician, as a person who's running for federal office.
What I was saying before is, let me see if I can say this a little bit simpler for the viewer out there. There are problems with policing. There are a lot of problems with citizens. There's responsibility on both sides of the badge. You could argue that there is more moral and ethical responsibility on the police side of the badge due to the fundamental common sense norm that we want our government and our politicians, elected officials, and police or law enforcement to have more integrity than your average American citizen. If not, they're really, the scales of justice are going to be off, right? I mean, we won't really have.
Sorry, we need to just mute this. Okay. Is there a way to mute the?
Could just turn down the volume.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So we're gonna have to do one.
I'll say it again.
Like 10-second rewind.
It's no problem.
We'll just have to remember to turn the volume back up.
Okay.
It's no problem. Again, policing has its problems. There's responsibility on both sides of the badge, obviously. In theory, we would say there's more responsibility on the police side of the badge because we want our government, elected officials, and law enforcement officers to have more integrity, more morals and ethics than your average American citizen. I think that's common sense. At least it should be accepted as common sense. However, I would say a good portion of the responsibility of how policing is going falls more on the side of the citizens. And not so much in the interactions between citizens and cops, but what we as citizens have accepted as culture, what we've accepted as the status quo. That status quo is that there's some measurable amount of cultural decay that we accept in pursuit of whatever industrial or economic or technological evolution or progression that we want, whatever materialism that we want as the baseline of our society. Does that make sense? I want to make sure that I'm conveying it in a way that people will understand. We as a culture in America have accepted that our corporations play a role in some cases, they aid the cultural decay of our country, of our society, our global society, you could say, in the interest of whatever. And many times it's profit, but sometimes it's power and other things as well. But we've accepted that. We the people, right? We the people have accepted that status quo of corruption. And so that all of that cultural decay ultimately ends up on the front doorstep of a police department. They're the first responders to all of they are the barometer, they are the litmus test, sort of, you could say, of what American culture has become at bottom. And so when you put a group of people, a certain group of people, a certain demographic of people, like our law enforcement officers, in that first responder position of everything that's the ugliest in our society, why would we expect that they don't have mental health issues, that they're not dealing with substance and drug abuse or alcohol addiction, alcohol abuse, or just basic emotional, intemperance and instability? Why would we expect that? We don't. We haven't really thought it through. Of course the cops are going to make grave errors and mistakes out there. Look at what we've done as a culture. Look at who we are.
One more time, can you say that? Of course the cops are going to...
Of course the cops are going to make mistakes, grave mistakes. Look at what we've become as a culture. Look at who we are. We're crazy. I mean, that's why, I'm not saying crazy in a tongue-in-cheek way, like my podcast, Please Call Me Crazy. I'm not saying it like that. I mean, we have a deep psychological decay in this country. Deep philosophical rot in this country, in our culture. Deep spiritual rot in our culture. And so, of course, when your law enforcement officers have to be the first responders of that, you're going to have problems. I mean, you're going to have problems on both sides of the badge. Now, again, am I making any excuses for people who misuse the badge, which we know is happening? Absolutely not. My response to defund the police would be refund the police. We need more cops. They need more money. They need to be paid better. They need to be trained more, and we should give them time and a half for any extra training. And then we should not tax them for any of their overtime. Yeah. Because it's hard to, and if you look at it even more from a structural standpoint, it's hard to hold anybody accountable if you pay them poorly and you train them poorly. There's really no fair standard to bring accountability, because you're basically saying, we pay you like shit, we train you like shit, and we expect you to do good. Of course not.
I didn't know you in 2020, but if I did know you in 2020 and I had asked you this question, would you have had the same view?
Well, yes, but we were dealing with a different situation. In that case, we were dealing with a situation where a cop had misused his authority. And I think that that's true. I still think that's true to this day.
But you got to say, just to put it...
Well, listen, I think this. George Floyd was mistreated that day. Bottom line. Was he a drug addict? Was he was he on drugs? It would appear so. Was he an upstanding citizen? No. Did he have coronary artery disease? Yes. Did he ingest drugs that day? It would appear so. Did he have COVID in his system? It would appear so. Could any number of things led to his death? Could the totality of circumstances and physical stress on him that day led to his eventual death? Absolutely. But was Derek Chauvin wrong? Yes. Was his prosecution political? Absolutely. His prosecution was political, and in that way, somewhat unfair. And I'll say that. I mean, that is the sort of nuance and fine line in a situation that was so widely covered and so much emotion in that you're not even supposed to say. You're supposed to take one side of the George Floyd, Derek Chauvin thing or the other. But that's not American citizenship. That's not intellectual integrity. It's not political integrity. It's not. He was wrong. Any cop who handles somebody that way is wrong. Did he deserve the charge that he got? That's a different question. And ultimately, was his prosecution based on the precedence of our legal system, or was it based on the fact that people had burned down the city and everybody was afraid if we didn't prosecute him, it would continue to happen? Now, some would argue from a more libertarian sense that the will of the people being expressed through public demonstration is supposed to influence the way that a jury of 12 peers would decide a verdict. All of these things still have to be talked about, but you already can understand that that's not the way that we talked about it in the media. And that's certainly not the way politicians have talked about it. And I hope to be a change to the norm in that way. But, and I'll say this even furthermore. My position on policing should be what many liberals on the left think about policing, and many conservatives on the right should think about policing. Our country was founded on individual freedom, rights that are granted to us by a creator, not by our government, and subsequently not by our law enforcement. So our law enforcement need very strict boundaries on the lines they will and won't cross in terms of their interaction with citizens. And we must always, as American citizens, uphold that cultural norm. So, and I go all the way back to the days of Christ in the Bible and the apostles, and Paul, the great Saint Paul, saying to the centurion guard, "Am I a Roman citizen? Do you have the right to bind and beat a Roman citizen who has not yet stood trial?" And the centurion guard, out of such respect for the idea of Roman citizenship, stopped what he was doing. That wasn't the case out there on 38th in Chicago that day. When those other Roman citizens, American citizens, told Derek Chauvin to stop what he was doing, to back off, he thought that his position had more authority than all of them combined. And that is an unequal distribution of what we consider American citizenship, and that should be bipartisan. It's obviously not, because the mainstream media has fomented such a polarizing discourse about policing and blacks. So much so that the cops don't see the danger of an over-policed state, and blacks don't see the danger of having no police. I mean, I'm just not the guy that they're going to paint me out to. I'm not going to let people pigeonhole me. And this conversation deserves the utmost nuance and the utmost integrity and discipline, you could say, conversational discipline, and being able to deal with that nuance. It's not black and white, despite how much they try and make it that way. There's nothing black and white about it. There are black cops, there are white cops. There are black citizens, there are white citizens. There are black cops that get shot on the job, on a routine traffic stop with other black citizens. There are white citizens that get shot by white cops when they were unarmed and didn't deserve to be. This is an issue that we really have to bring a standard of leadership that can add some clarity, some cultural clarity.
And again, only because I just met you today, in 2020, going beyond just George Floyd, but onto the broader conversation about policing, have your views changed since 2020? Is this what you would have said?
No. What I was saying in 2020 was things like, when we look at how much funding goes to the police, we need to understand where that funding goes, how it's used, how it's allocated. We need to understand that the police in this country have been intentionally used as the lowest rung of the military-industrial complex. And we do have an over-militarized police. And you could say that that's somewhat justified because of how chaotic and violent our communities have become. But the chaos and violence in our communities are an intentional outcome as well. So we're fighting against each other, but really the people that preside over us, the governance that presides over us, has built these building blocks of division. And then they want to come and double and triple down on the division by drawing on it and saying, well, you're right and you're wrong, or you're right and you're wrong, when really they're wrong.
And so coming back to your campaign, what I know you've talked about.
Refund the police. As far as the campaign goes right now, we need to refund the police. We need more police. They need more funding. They need to be paid better. They need more training, significantly more training. And they need time and a half for any extra training they would like to do. And we should not tax them for their overtime. And I also think, when I talk about funding, see, most people would think about funding in a sort of defund or not defund the police sense. When I'm talking about funding, I'm saying that even police funding is a part of a corrupt culture, a corrupt cultural status quo in DC of omnibus legislation. And there are certain essential services and let's say institutions in this country that deserve to have their funding be isolated for the betterment of America. I think veterans would be another one. I don't like that the funding for the veterans in this country is always tied into this omnibus legislation. Their funding should be separate and secure. But police in the same way in a great deal. Because these are what you call essential institutions that we can't live without. At least not right now. Could we move back to the real theme of the campaign, from a philosophical standpoint, in the beginning was, you can't have freedom without self-governance, but you can't have self-governance without sacred honor and national honor. That calls everybody's feet to the fire. Even in this Black Lives Matter, defund the police, thin blue line, back to blue dichotomy, it calls everybody's feet to the fire. Yeah, you can't have freedom without self-governance, but you can't have self-governance without national honor and sacred honor. So if citizens want to police themselves, then you got to act like you have some sense. And right now, even in our Black communities, we are not doing that. We are given every incentive possible for police to come into our communities with the utmost of anxiety and fear. And every time we do it, every time a young Black man out there does it, every time a young Black man out there acts in a way that's not becoming of an upstanding citizen and shows a level of violence and stupidity that is shameful and disgraceful, they give justification for over-policing. But do you think they're teaching that in their elementary schools? Do you think a young Black man comes up? I can tell you from experience, because I wasn't too long ago, I was in school myself. They don't teach you that in school. There are no more American civics. They took the American civics out. It was intentional. That's my point. It's not about the police or the citizens, it's the institutions. The academic institutions in this country, decimated the idea of integrity, morals, and ethics from an institutional and cultural standpoint. The new cultural norm in the postmodern era is whatever you think is right is right. Whatever's right in your own little reality is right. Doesn't matter about anybody else. It's the ultimate form of what you would call clinical narcissism. But it's become the institutional norm. Whatever you think is right, and there's some justification for it. So when you're a young Black man growing up in the inner city and you go to public school, do you think those public school teachers are telling them, when you let that infectious hip hop music get you to believe that being a thug or a gangster or a criminal that does drugs and makes bad decisions, do you think that doesn't have an impact on how your entire community is policed? Do you think that's the sort of framework that's drawn for a young Black man growing up in this country? Absolutely not. That's why they hate Minister Louis Farrakhan. It's got nothing to do with him being Muslim or him being anti-Semitic. And you can make an argument that those things both have issues. I'm not saying that you can make that argument. Again, it's America. But conservatives and liberals alike, they make the same argument in many regards around Minister Louis Farrakhan. And I'm not a Minister Louis Farrakhan acolyte or student or apologist, but I'm just saying it's great examples like, how can we talk about policing and the racial conversation that's been drawn in this country without talking about historical Black figures in the Black community like Minister Louis Farrakhan? You can't do it. My point is, the reason they don't like Minister Louis Farrakhan is because the Nation of Islam has always preached that young Black men have to carry themselves with a certain sort of self-respect and discipline. And if you pull that cog out of the machine, the justification for racial identity politics and over-policing disappears. And it's not a conspiracy theory. We are third in gun violence in this country. Third in gun violence out of 193 countries. If you took out the top 5 cities for gun violence, Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis, Philadelphia, and Los Angeles, if you took those 5 cities out of the statistics, we would go from being third to being 189th. So a lot of that crime is in our Black communities. And if a lot of those young Black men grew up with a better sense of discipline and self-respect, that whole industry and racket disappears. Maybe it doesn't disappear completely, but it changes dramatically.
I want to ask you a couple things then. Although we just met today, I've spent a fair bit of time in activist circles here in Minneapolis and outside of Minneapolis, and I can say for sure there are certain people, if they heard you say that, white and Black alike, they would be in strong disagreement. They would not take kindly to what you just said.
Which part?
Everything you just said.
Everything?
Especially the last part.
About Farrakhan?
No, taking Farrakhan out of the equation, about gun violence in the cities.
The gun thing, okay.
The Black community, your
Gotcha.
criticism. And again, there's no comment on my own position, But I just, having spent time in circles.
They would say that saying that the black on black crime in black communities is a problem is racism?
There's people I've met for sure that would strongly resist.
Are they white liberals?
And we're getting to that.
Okay,
so,
good.
You brought it up.
Let a white liberal tell me what it's like to grow up in the heart of a black community, and they might not make it out of the conversation without some serious conflict. Ain't no white liberal in this country gonna tell me what it's like to grow up in a black community and the dangers that every black man in a black community faces when thinking about the fact that they're more likely to be shot and killed by one of their own fellow black community men or women members than they are anybody else. No white liberal, for a white liberal to even question it is disrespectful, it's insulting, and they should be absolutely ashamed. And that has been, and I know what you're saying, because that has become a hallmark of the liberal political worldview and their political platform. A bunch of white liberals going to tell me what it's like to grow up on the north side of Minneapolis? I had friends shot and killed. They're not here no more. They're dead. I paid for the funerals. I know their parents. I was there with their parents when they were crying, when they were coming back from the coroner's office. I've sat in those trials, in those courtrooms. I know what's happening in my community. Ain't no white liberal gonna tell me that it's racist to say that black on black crime is an issue. Of course it's an issue. Absolutely, it's no different. And many of them, they got the audacity to wear the t-shirts with Malcolm X or quote Malcolm X. They're so selective, they're so a la carte with their Malcolm X lore, and that's what it is for them. It's lore, it's cosplay. Use Malcolm X as the figure of my revolutionary mindset. Stop the games. Malcolm X said the greatest threat to the black person in America is the white liberal. And not only that, in one of the most infamous, one of the most famous or popular interviews that Malcolm X did was his interview at Berkeley, where he talked about Harlem and how everybody in the Civil Rights Act talk about nonviolence as a political philosophy, yet we're still stabbing each other in Harlem. See, we need hospitals, he said, because we're still stabbing each other and knifing each other in Harlem. Instead of talking about going to some other community or being led into some other community, why don't you make your community a place that you would actually want to live? Why don't the white liberals make the black communities in this country a place where black people would actually want to live? Instead of dangling this corporate carrot that says, if you shut your mouth and go along to get along with the NBA, you'll have riches and fame, and then you can come live with us. Then you can go live with the Nancy Pelosi's and the Clintons and the Bidens in Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania. See, don't get me started there, because I'll probably go off on an hour-long rant.
I know, so it came down on David Packman for it.
Yeah, perfect example. David Packman, prime example. Pompous, arrogant, self-aggrandized, hypocritical white liberal.
So Mike is saying something. Mike, what's up?
So I guess I don't know that I heard the tail end as clearly, but I guess, and I'm not trying to address black on black crime specifically so much as, from what I've heard, it's not necessarily black on black crime so much as the way Minneapolis is structured. The question is less about racism straight up so much as the structure of how social strata and class comes in as
right. That's a perfectly
institutionally.
Mike, wait a second, Mike. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to point out. Yes, there is structural issues in black communities all across the country. There are structural issues in America all across the country. Institutional and structural issues, systematic issues. The great gaffe here is that most of those systematic and structural issues were implemented and overseen by the exact same people who say Black Lives Matter now. They were in charge of it. This was what I was saying earlier. This is the we don't want to go that deep, syndrome. The post-World War II Democrat liberal order set the entire economic and monetary system up in this country and all around the world to keep your working class and poor people working class and poor. It's called the post-World War II Democratic Liberal Order. It claimed that it was going to use freedom and democracy to make everybody self-determining. But what is it responsible for? What has been the result? The result is young black men in Chicago who are 18 years old find it more lucrative and more meaningful to run into a department store and snatch a bunch of Italian designer bags that are overpriced anyway, rather than go to school and read a book. And they don't read at grade level. They don't do math at grade level. Who's been in charge of the educational system here in Minneapolis? The Democrats. The Democrats have been in charge of the Minnesota Education Board for many generations. So how can they say that the lack of education or the institutional roadblocks are anybody else's fault other than their own?
So I'm going to go back and ask you again.
Okay.
Have these views cost you any relation? I mean,
No. When you actually say it to people, even who are liberal, they go, yeah, you make a good point. Yeah, I know I make a good point. I know, and I know you're still not going to vote for Trump because they've thrown so much dirt on his name and painted him in such a negative light that you just can't bring yourself to do it. I get it, but it's not going to change the fundamental reality of what's going on in this country. Certainly not in Minneapolis. Certainly not for our children. They're still not going to read or do math at grade level, and that's still going to have downstream societal, cultural, community consequences. The number one consequence, in fact, is that if you don't read or do math at grade level, it's going to be hard for you to understand how these institutions actually function. You're not going to be able to read the Federal Register. You're not going to be able to understand the budget committees, the results of the budget committees of your politicians, locally or federal. You're not going to understand what it means when they say we're adding $1 trillion to the debt every 100 days, so much so we can't even service the interest of the debt. It's not going to resonate with you when we say we're bankrupt as a country and having an open border and endless wars is going to come down to bear on your cost and quality of life. You won't understand that. So again, how can you say that this? How can we in good conscience say the same liberals who would come up with all of these esoteric reasons why black people are suffering in this country? All of those people, how can we say that they haven't undereducated the people intentionally? They run the institutions, and the undereducation results in people not being able to bring the reasonable and rightful criticism to them that they should.
I want to ask you, what do you think about it says about today's political moment that you got the nomination, that you're running for, as you said, the first black candidate?
First black person ever endorsed or nominated in Minnesota history to run for United States Senate.
So what is that?
Why didn't the Democrats nominate somebody black to run for Senate?
What was that?
Why didn't the Democrats in Minnesota ever nominate or endorse somebody to run for United States Senate who was black?
And what does it say then? What does it mean to you that you've been nominated?
Well, it says that the racial narrative is a real house of cards upheld by the mainstream media, for sure. All of these MAGA Republicans are racist. They're racist, they're xenophobic, they're homophobic, they're transphobic, they're bigoted, they're any name you could, they're vile, they're conspiracy theorists. But there's not one thing I've said here today in an hour and a half that's a conspiracy theory. There's some conspiracy, that's for sure, I would say. I'd say there's a lot of conspiracy in this country. I don't know how theoretical it is, but I've said nothing that's way, without evidence or without substantial cultural and political precedents. In fact, it's to the exact contrary. So these people elected me or they nominated me simply because what? I'm the token black guy? Or have I connected with something that they've been looking for in a candidate for a long time?
What do you think that connection is, and how do you differentiate yourself from what you would call cuckservatives?
Oh, cuckservatives! Don't get me going on the cuckservatives.
I'm getting you going on cuckservatives.
Well, let's talk about that in a minute, because if there's one thing I'm proud of, it's I've brought the word cuck and cuckservative to the mainstream American political discourse. I'm very proud of that. I take pride in that, partly because it's my generation, right? I'm younger than the boomer generation, so the entire internet culture and the pornography culture I'm familiar with because I'm in that age group, right? But differentiating myself is quite simple. I didn't get into politics for it to be a job. I didn't get into politics for it to be a career. I only got into politics to speak a truth that I thought wouldn't be spoken unless I got into politics. And a truth that I think politicians won't speak unless they are They are given permission by somebody else who leads in taking the arrows, like I've always done, like I've done since I was 21 years old. And that status quo, again, is most of these politicians are bought and paid for. The money in politics is obscene. The PAC money, the special interest money, the deals and handshakes that happen under the table and behind closed doors, it's obscene, and we all know it. But it's as much on the American people as it is on the politicians. The politicians are only doing what the American people will allow them to do. And the American people, in great part, like a politician who's polished and polite, and inevitably will become a puppet because they don't have the backbone to say what needs to be said. There's no profit in it. Or there's not enough profit in it, let's say. There's not the right kind of profit.
Backtracking a second, what do you think it says, not so much about you, not just about you, but about the GOP and what they want, that the GOP, the GOP...
I can't speak for the GOP. You mean, well, you got to differentiate between the voters and the establishment. And there's a significant differentiation to be made there.
What does it mean for you from the perspective of the voters?
Oh, the voters.
Yeah.
Well, look, the American First movement has taken the country storm for a reason. And they can try and, and even let's look at, what's my guy's name? Jamie Dimon, right? Jamie Dimon's not a Trump supporter. He's not a conservative. He's not a far right-wing populist conspiracy theorist. And even he had to let's say, concede that the entire Donald Trump movement and his supporters aren't crazy far-right conspiracy theorists. That's Jamie Dimon. I mean, Jamie Dimon's about as liberal or uniparty as you could possibly find in corporate America, by my measure. Okay, he operates in a world beyond the world, not about cultural wedge issues, about how interest rates work. That's how financial institutions really operate, right? So he's not operating in the same sort of political zeitgeist many people are, on the surface. And even he had to say, wait a second, guys, we can't just act like everybody who supports Donald Trump is some crazy conspiracy theorist. That ain't gonna win, okay? Now, I don't know whether or not it will win. That'll ultimately be up to the people. But it says something that somebody from that side of that much influence and position in society would say that. So my point in reference in Jamie Dimon is the America First and MAGA voters, they really believe in the idea of America First. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with taking care of home first. It's actually the most genuine and salient political movement in recent political history since the 1960s. It's even more significant than the Civil Rights Act or the anti-war hippie movements or the women's and gay rights. It's even more significant than that because those movements were co-opted into the overall direction of the permanent political class's agenda. This movement is actually in direct repudiation of that political norm and status quo. You understand? The status quo of American politics is we are a global empire. This is the other great dishonesty. The universities have the audacity to talk about neocolonialism and white supremacy as if it should determine the way that everybody thinks and subsequently votes or spends their money. But they're upholding the neocolonial world order. The post-World War II democratic liberal order was the transfer of power between the British colonial empire to the new Pax Americana colonial empire. We just put our name on it and rebranded it. That's what the post-World War II democratic liberal order are. That's why most of our foreign policy is actually British foreign policy. The Sino-Japanese theater against China, British foreign policy. The Russia-Ukraine theater, British foreign policy. Okay? The theater there in the Middle East, British foreign policy. We adopted Great Britain's foreign policy. And now the same liberals who say white supremacy is the scourge of the planet are fighting tooth and nail to uphold that foreign policy. You can't make it up. I actually lose sleep at night because the goodness in me has trouble trying to reconcile whether or not people actually believe what they're saying or if they're really just trying to gaslight me. You understand what I'm saying? Because I want to believe that they actually just haven't connected those dots for the average person. I know the people at top, like the Bob Keegans and the Victoria Newlands and the Nancy Pelosi's and Bidens and the Bushes and and the Karl Roves and the David Frums and all. I know they know exactly what they're doing. But when I meet your average person in the street who's been brainwashed with this democratic liberal order worldview, I have trouble knowing where they fall in that dichotomy. Have they actually made a conscious decision that because of whatever other single issue they have, they're willing to accept a lie? Or do they really not know? It's very possible, and I'm leaving to keep open the door, that they actually don't know, which is also why I ran for office, which is also why the Republicans nominated me, because they see me as somebody who's genuinely trying to speak to the people about the issues that matter.
How do you feel, so another question here. You know that the first thing, unless Mike, you had something to jump in here?
Yeah.
So the first entry, we talked about this on the phone.
Yeah.
Wikipedia, conspiracy theorist, right off the top.
Yeah.
You've been criticized.
Racist. Racism.
Your Twitter profile.
Racism.
Women are
The opening line of my Wikipedia page being Royce is an American conspiracy theorist is the latent racism of the liberal world order. It's racist to say that there is a liberal world order, but they can say it publicly, openly. But if you're black and you run Republican and you support Donald Trump, you can't say there's a liberal world order or that there's any problem with it. You went to the Congo. You saw those cobalt mines. You know how the same liberals and lefties that are part of these big tech companies act like they have some altruistic, secular humanist ambition for every single person on the planet, but just not yet for you Congolese underage miners of cobalt, because we still need your cobalt, because our ambitions for technology transcend our desire for you to have a quality or equitable life. Yeah, right? That's the post-World War II democratic liberal order. That's the British Empire's business model. Drugs, piracy, slavery. So the same liberals who say, oh, you black people, you black people are just under-resourced and undereducated. Your David Pagmans, no, black people are just suffering from systemic racism. In the schools that we're in charge of the education, by the way. But no problem with the Congolese kids going down into a cobalt mine and picking the cobalt from the side of the mountain or the side of the mine with their bare hands until their hands bleed. No problem with that. As long as I'm tweeting my activism and altruism on my cell phone, then all the means justify the end. The end justify the means, right? So when they say I'm a conspiracy theorist, is the cobalt mine a conspiracy theory? I'm asking you.
I don't think so, personally, but...
No. Yeah. Are there Congolese kids digging cobalt out of that cobalt mine used as a source material for modern day technology in this country?
So the thing I'm talking about, though, is not that you are or not a conspiracy theorist. What I'm wondering is how people in your life have reacted to women are too mouthy, the Twitter profile.
That's a separate issue.
Things that you say are jokes. I understand.
That's a separate issue, though.
Yeah, so that's what I'm asking is just...
Well, yeah, I'm sorry then. I misunderstood where we were going. But when you start with American conspiracy, I think that's a more important point.
We're gonna address that, continue addressing that.
Good.
What I'm asking is just more on a personal level.
Yeah, who cares?
Joking about
Respectfully, who cares on a personal level? I never have cared what people in my personal life thought or felt or how they reacted unless it was in alignment with the truth. You could be my mom, you could be my child, you could be my grandfather, you could be my wife, you could be my priest. It doesn't matter. If what you're saying or how you feel doesn't align with the truth, I'm more likely to tell you about it than I am to apologize for it. That's just who I am. Good for not being influenced when you're in politics. A lot of people don't have that strength. I do. Either we're going to talk about the truth or not talk at all, and I'm fine with that. I'm good living alone. I'll die with the truth.
Let's talk about the so-called conspiracy theories then.
Please.
When you put these things out there are going to be people...
Which ones?
That just in the general public.
No, but I mean which ones specifically?
There are going to be the people that are David Pacman, for example.
No, which conspiracy theories?
No, I'm not saying you have conspiracy theories.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying when you.
I mean, which ones are you referencing?
Like liberal world order, the post-World
Okay,
War II,
got it.
something like
Got
that. There's going to be people that disagree with it and call it a conspiracy theory.
Right.
And I'm wondering, what has it been like to have that pushback?
It's expected. Yeah, I mean, it's expected. I mean, that's the whole art of the conspiracy theory. That's the whole art of conspiracy, is that people lack the fundamental knowledge and evidence that they need to corroborate the accusation or the claim. That's what Edward Snowden said, isn't it? Didn't Edward Snowden say that in order to prove that the government's doing something illegal, the great strategic structural impediment is that you have to do something illegal to get the information? That's brilliant. You make it illegal to find the truth about what the government is doing that's illegal. Kind of like Donald Trump's document case, right? You make it illegal for the United States president, that's an independent branch of government, to keep documents that he may feel have broader implication on the overall integrity of our government as commander-in-chief.
Do you think that there is
Personally, I don't care if he kept the documents in his bathroom, under his bed, in his refrigerator, in a secret compartment, in a locked safe. Really doesn't matter to me. The broader question, and this goes back to the same people who say defund the police, love the idea that the intelligence community and what we refer to as the deep state or the administrative state have this broad autonomous power and authority. That's the real gaffe of the whole George Floyd saga. That's the real gaffe of the whole George Floyd situation. The whole system is guilty. Mike was there. Mike was out there on the streets. Anybody who was in any George Floyd protests all around the country, you heard what they said. The whole system is guilty. Which system? That system is the post-World War II democratic liberal order. That system is a broad scope and authority of governance. The expansion and the expansion and the overfunding of the intelligence community in the interest of a global empire. So what part of the system were they referring to? I think theirs is a conspiracy theory. I think they've created a slogan that identifies a problem they're not willing to put a name or a face to, or they're willing to put a scapegoat on. And while I thought Derek Chauvin was wrong that day, my broader point is he became a scapegoat. He became a way to say, that's what's wrong with the government. No, it's not. What's wrong with the government is 51 intelligence community officers signing a document that the Hunter Biden laptop was a fake, that it was a fake story. That's what's wrong with our government. That's what led to JFK's assassination. Are you going to say JFK's assassination is a conspiracy theory? Yeah, because the government's unwilling to declassify the information. They've created the circumstance for conspiracy theory, and they did it intentionally. And we all know it. We all know it. Every boomer who's watching this tonight on PBS remembers a time when America had greater trust in their institutions, or they weren't afraid to speak the truth. And after JFK had his brains blown off on national television, everybody had this strike of fear that went through the entire American culture. It said one thing: you get too close, it's the Icarus effect, you know? It's the Icarus warning. You fly too close to the sun, you get burned. So, again, I go back to my point is, who's really pushing the conspiracy theory here? The magic bullet? Are you kidding me? People still believe the magic bullet theory. Come on. I mean, okay, if you do, fine. I mean, I'm sure that the blissful ignorance is a wonderful way for people to live. It gives me anxiety, honestly. So the remedy for most people is, I'll drink or I'll do drugs or I'll lose myself in whatever vice that I can find to not have to confront the truth. That never worked for me.
Question popped into my mind. What gives you the most anxiety?
That right there. Well, what gives me the most anxiety is the idea of going to hell. That gives me a lot of anxiety. I say from an existential standpoint, that's probably the number one fear. My second fear is that I wouldn't be able to protect my children or my family and loved ones. That strikes me often. But other than that, is that the idea of American citizenship has been bastardized and undermined to a level that we may not ever get back, and that some future generations may not even know. My real fear is that technology gets to a point where generations will be born and bred into a cultural norm where they'll never remember the idea of American freedom and what it was supposed to mean. That's why I'm running for United States Senate.
On that note, I do want to ask you about the events of January 6th.
Please.
What are those events when you see them on TV? Regarding everything you just told me, what do you see?
I call BS. When it comes to January 6th, I call BS for the mainstream media and the politicians there in DC. Because I was a part of peaceful protests for George Floyd, but I also organized those peaceful protests in response to complete and utter anarchy, violence, fire, arson, and other things here in the city of Minneapolis. So I'm completely aware of just how violent and chaotic some of these Black Lives Matter protests got. And I'm aware of how the government dealt with it. And I'm aware of how the mainstream media framed the narrative. And so for their political opponents to do something very similar, or something that they themselves would have even suggested to their own Black Lives Matter constituents, is just dishonest on face value. I can bring up a clip right now of Nancy Pelosi saying you should get up and punch him in the face, or Cory Booker saying get up in your political get up in your elected official's face, get right up in their face. Now, obviously, he thought that only applied to the Republicans. And that's a real narcissistic and self-aggrandized way to look at American politics, isn't it? If you're black, or if you're a part of the Democrat Party, even casually around the country, because we've absorbed all of these identity politics groups and their grievances, you can get up in the face of your politicians. But if anybody who supports Donald Trump wants to come to the doorstep of power and get up in our face about their views, it's insurrection. Don't insult my intelligence. Is what they did on that day right? By my standard, no. And my criticism of the Republican Party has been the lack of, not the Republican Party, I'm sorry, they're in on the scam. My criticism of the MAGA movement has been the lack of temperance. That a real exercise of American citizenship would be the same 100-day sit-ins that the civil rights movement had to get their agenda through. So, and I've said that on the record a number of times, never makes it to the mainstream media's articles, where I say 100-day sit-ins before you ever choose violence. And if you don't, it's a lack of your own determination and commitment to have the America that you want. So I don't agree with what they did that day, but I certainly don't agree with the narrative that was spun about it.
What narrative was spun, and what narrative do you see as being the truthful one?
The narrative that was spun was that under no circumstances, no matter how corrupt the government is or its politicians, they should never be in any danger or have to fear the people. That's ridiculous. There's nothing American about that. In fact, it's much more totalitarian in the shadow or the line of thought of a Chinese Communist Party than it is American values. The government and the politicians, no matter how corrupt or dishonest, should never have to fear the people. There's nothing American about that. Honestly, there's just nothing American about that. And they all know it. And they know it because they said the exact same thing when the shoe was on the other foot. They said, we fought for rights. We fought for freedom. That's why Kamala Harris comes out to the Beyonce freedom song. Freedom, freedom, I can't, But the point is that American freedom, in their own words, sometimes involves violent protest by their standards. But to think that you can have it just the way you want it would actually be the clinical definition of narcissism.
I want to talk to you, pivot a little bit to the current election.
Okay.
We haven't talked much about that.
Okay.
Kamala Harris, do you have any excitement around the first black female candidate? I know we talked about identity politics a little bit.
Yeah.
Does that play into anything for you?
Yeah, I have no excitement about it. I'm offended by it. I'm very offended by Kamala Harris's candidacy, let alone the idea that this is going to be a milestone for black people. Look, The reason why I even mentioned my being the first black person to be endorsed or nominated for United States Senate in the history of Minnesota is to point out the hypocrisy and the contradiction of the coverage from mainstream media. I really don't think that's the milestone. I mean, maybe in my community, maybe in my personal local community, it's something that people can be proud of. Hey, look, he's somebody from our community but that could be black or it could be Rondo. I could be the first person to be endorsed to run for United States Senate in the history of Minnesota from the Rondo community, possibly. And there's white people there. White people I love, white people who are family. My white Norwegian grandmother lived in the Rondo community. My Mexican grandmother lived on the west side of St. Paul, right? So, there's a lot of different ways you can look at milestones and what should be seen as something to pay attention to and acknowledge and hold in a high regard. But the litmus test for that should be the integrity of the person that you're celebrating. And Kamala Harris has no integrity whatsoever. Zero. She has zero integrity whatsoever across the board, but specifically when it comes to black people. Actually, Kamala Harris, again, represents that same guilty system we said we were protesting after George Floyd died, where the criminal justice system and law enforcement mistreat black people. Kamala Harris represents that system. She was in a position of power in that system, a significant position of power. So much so that she made her staff call her general, didn't she? Because when you're the attorney general, you can go by the name General Harris. She was a general of the system. I've never been a general of the system. I've always been with the people. So if people want to celebrate that milestone of me being the first to come from my community and be nominated, celebrate that. Celebrate that I've never been a part of the guilty system. Stand on that. Stand with me on this side of the line on that. But you can't celebrate me and celebrate Kamala because we're from two different cloths.
How do you feel she did in the debate? And Trump, how do you assess the debate?
I thought the debate went well. Look, Donald Trump has been drugged through the mud. The man was shot. I mean, they lie about him as much as they possibly can. The mainstream media coverage tilts in one direction, obviously. So him and his campaign are trying to fight off a number of different, lies, while simultaneously trying to paint and articulate a vision for the future. And that's difficult to do, especially when you're 78 years old and you just got shot. You almost were killed. That's no easy feat. So I see him being a little bit frustrated, and rightfully so. I'm frustrated. I started the interview off by telling you that I'm it's a good day. Alive is better than dead, but I'm frustrated.
Why? About what?
Because people would rather have BS, stuff with BS and wrapped in BS rather than deal with the truth. That's the reality. You get the government you deserve. Everybody thinks politics are about the candidates. It's not about the candidates, it's about the people. Are the politicians willing to stand on truth and uphold a representation that reflects the will of the people? But the will of the people has to be a will that's even articulable, that can even be articulated. Right now, we have such a schizophrenic society and culture, it's hard to even really articulate a consistent theme and will of our country. So my point is that, in saying that, is the debate showed you two faces of American politics. One face of a person who's fought for the last 8 years, by my estimation, to speak the uncomfortable truth. The other person who has smiled and waved and shilled for the very system they say is guilty, for the very system they participated in. Donald Trump wasn't a prosecutor. Donald Trump didn't sign the documents, the court orders to send young black men to jail for petty drug crimes. He's not responsible for that. His opinions may be even in accordance in some points in history. I'm not sure. That's not even really the point. What he thinks or what he says doesn't matter. He wasn't a systematic part. He wasn't a part of that systematic process. He wasn't a core part of the systematic process. He wasn't the stroke of the pen in the systematic process. How do people overlook that? It's frustrating. And it doesn't matter, I don't care if she's black. She could be black, she could be white, she could be Mexican, she could be anything, she could be clear, she could be from outer space, she could be from Pluto. You know, she could be from the Orion, the asteroid belt. I don't care where she's from or how she looks. I'm talking about the ideas and the integrity. It's laughable.
What do you think she stands for when you see her on the debate stage? What do you, if you had to come up with?
Kamala Harris stands for the culmination of a project that was started in this country many generations ago to make identity politics the focal point of American society. She is the culmination of that ambition.
Why? To what end?
Because at the very moment when American people should be focused on the core issues or the root causes of everything wrong with our society, we find ourselves more focused on the WWE politics and cosplay of identity, virtue signaling. I look altruistic, but I still take the cobalt from the Congo. And Kamala's just like that. I mean, that's a prime example. I haven't heard her once talk about the cobalt mines in the Congo.
I heard an interesting thing.
Have you? I just want to. Have you?
I have.
Have you heard? Have you back there? Have you heard Kamala Harris speak once about the cobalt mines in the Congo?
I can't say. It doesn't mean she hasn't, but I can't say.
It hasn't been a priority, has it?
I heard an interesting perspective. I'm wondering what you think. Again, this is not me saying I agree with this. It was actually on all places on Russian radio. I'm Russian, so I was listening to Russian radio and news radio, and they were talking about American politics. They said, with Kamala Harris, the candidate you get is not really Kamala Harris as an individual. It's the Democratic, it's like the Democratic Party, like a representation of them.
It's like an amalgamation of thought and the Democrat thought.
And with
Yes.
Donald Trump, you get like it's almost like it's just Donald Trump. There's no you can't swap him in or out.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, does that
That resonates. Absolutely. Who said that? Who made that?
It was just a commentator on Russian radio.
On Russian radio? Oh well, now I'm gonna be
I'm not saying.
Now I'm gonna be a Russian apologist or whatever. But you know, here I'll say this about the Russians. Well, first let me answer your question. That is a very, very accurate description of what's going on, and it doesn't surprise me that a Russian would be saying it. I'll say that. Kamala Harris that's exactly what I just said, isn't it? That Kamala Harris is the amalgamation of Democrat thought. Or let's say that the ambition of the project of the democratic liberal order to distract the American people with identity politics started in the universities. So you could say that Kamala Harris is the pipe dream of Karl Marx and the postmodernists.
Do you think she's really a communist or a Marxist?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, she's a communist.
What of her policies? What does she put out there?
They're okay with the slow pain and agony of losing the cultural norm of private ownership to bigger institutions that are going to inevitably merge with the state.
You've talked about the management.
That is the pipe dream of Marx, by the way. The pipe dream of Marx is that you reduce the human existence down to price. And inevitably, no matter what he and his compadres said about their ambitions and goals to right the unequal distribution of wealth, their real ambition was one, to kill God in the society. So that's a given. They were Satanists. But even furthermore, if you set people on a track where they're left with nothing but identity politics, eventually they'll spend more time in the public square talking about each other's identity while the institutions of power consolidate power. And when they consolidate that power, inevitably you're going to lose the individual private ownership. And that's what's starting to happen in this country. Look, over the last 10 years since Obama went in office, we've had the sharpest decline and least new homeowners since the 1950s, of any decade since the 1950s. And this is what Steve Bannon said in your PBS Frontline interview with Bannon, where he said, the quantitative easing, Obama, and this whole world order, said that the housing market was going to collapse, and then the entire global economy a few days later, if we didn't get this $1 trillion of taps of liquidity, and then they went on for another $3.5 trillion, the whole goal was nobody's going to own anything anymore. And since that time, we have seen the sharpest decline in home ownership, which is sort of the cornerstone of private individual ownership for American citizens. We've seen the sharpest decline since the 1950s.
Yeah, you've got BlackRock buying up a lot of...
Is that not communism? See, this is the great trick. Because BlackRock is an investment group who practices capitalistic methods, we get caught up in the idea that the underlying ideology couldn't be communist in its nature. Buying up, if you're going to make the distinction between capitalism and communism, as communism has to win over the people's willful surrender of their ownership on an ideological basis, I disagree that that's communism. I think that a communist could quite easily use capitalistic methods to monopolize all of the natural resources and industry and then have a communist ideology underneath it. And I think BlackRock is that. And I think most of this liberal world order has a communist impulse. That's why that's why they don't mind the Chinese Communist Party being the crown jewel of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Is that a conspiracy theory?
Right.
Is it a conspiracy theory that China and the CCP have become the crown jewel of our entire global community's vision for the future? Of course not. They say it openly. We should all be more like China because when you fly into Beijing, the airport's so clean. But never mind the 2 million Uyghurs they had to put in a concentration camp to make it happen. Communists. Wasn't it the people in California? Wasn't it Pelosi and Gavin, pretty boy Gavin, and Kamala too, because she's sort of that California Democrat politician, even though she's not in office anymore. But that's her cohort right there. Didn't they clean the streets up of the homelessness just so Xi Jinping could come to visit us here in America? You're cleaning the streets of the homeless, the American homeless, to honor the arrival of a dignitary, a world leader from your national mortal enemy's country, who, by the way, is a communist, and not only that, a totalitarian communist, a deeply totalitarian communist. We don't have to just talk about the Uyghurs. We can talk about the Chinese surveillance system writ large and how much the social credit score is a mechanism of tyranny. Yes, she's a communist.
I need to get you to say the sentence just because we're not going to hear my question. I think Kamala Harris is a communist, yes. One more time, I think, just so we can get a clean...
I don't think she's a communist. Kamala Harris is a communist. Absolutely.
Good, I just want to make sure we get the clean audio.
Yeah. Okay.
Not trying to tell you exactly...
Yeah, no, I got you.
It's because we didn't hear me saying...
Do I think she's a communist?
Yeah. So, okay, let me just make sure... Oh, there's actually a question I wanted to ask you about.
Okay.
You talked about the managed decline of the West, which
Yeah.
I find to be an interesting phrase.
Okay.
Managed by whom and to what end?
Well, the managed decline of the West is another theory, not a conspiracy theory, that was brought about around the 1980s, mid to late 80s, early 90s, by people like Kissinger and other international thought leaders and dignitaries about the overall standing of America in the face of what was presumably the rise of China. In fact, they called it the second law of thermonuclear dynamics, the inexorable rise of China. And Kissinger was greatly involved with China being opened up as the great new horizon of manufacturing, consumption, and trade for American foreign policy. And the whole idea was that we were going to, again, through that post-World War II democratic liberal order, we were going to make China and the other communist nations more like us. That capitalism and free trade and interdependent and commingled markets were going to inevitably push these communist ideologues to think more along the lines of reasonable capitalistic materialist means, ambitions, desires. And the exact opposite happened. They tricked us. Yeah, the Chinese tricked us. and so did a lot of these other communist nations. They laid back in the weeds. They let the capitalist ambition of the post-World War II democratic order play out, which inevitably led to China becoming the great superpower and manufacturing base of the entire global economy. And by then could say, well, you know, China's rise is just inevitable. But the Chinese still get to be communists, yet we call them capitalists because they, do business? No. And the question still remains, did they do it on purpose or not? I would say they did it on purpose. I would say we crossed over an event horizon where everybody could reasonably see and measure that China was on the rise. And they said, to hell with it, because it's more in line with our ambition for world government. And I say that in response to the managed decline of the West, because this was something that they coined. This isn't a phrase that I just made up. This is something you can go back and listen to these international dignitaries and thought leaders say about America and the West as a society, that we were in decline, inevitably in decline, and the only thing to do was to manage that decline. I don't even agree with the premise. Why does America need to be in decline? Now, again, you talk about that neo-colonial history. Europe could be in decline. Do I really have time to go here? I just want to know, how much of an answer do you really want?
I just heard you say.
Okay, well let me explain it fully, for.
And then I want to give Mike.
Good. Let me explain it fully so that there's no
ambiguities about what you mean.
I mean, just that there's no gaps left in the footage. Okay. In 1913. Halford John Mackinder, who was a British academic, was charged with writing a paper, a treatise, you could say, on geopolitics. His treatise was the great pivot of history, and it led to what they call Mackinder's World Island theory, Jonathan Mackinder's theory of the world island. And his theory was pretty much based on the idea that as naval power and air military power grew, it would be ever more important to be able to walk to the resources that you needed. That there was going to be a race between naval and air power with land powers and empires that needed to be dealt with, specifically for the British Empire, because the British Empire had always been a great naval power, right? In this theory, he said that he who controls Eastern Europe controls the heartland, and he who controls the heartland controls the Eurasian world island. At the time, it was technically the Afro-Eurasian world island, but hey, those Africans really didn't count to those early 1900s British academics, right? So just the Eurasian world island. Right? But it included Europe, Asia, and Africa as the continental mass that you could walk to, where all the 50% of the world's resources were, and all of them you could walk to by land, okay? This theory completely props up the British Empire's business model of drug slavery and piracy. It has nothing to do with America. It has nothing to do with the Western Hemisphere. It was accepted by us, and I'll go further. This theory was written in 1905. 1913 is the inception of the Federal Reserve here in America. Shortly after is World War I. Shortly after that is World War II. At the end of World War II, we restructure the entire global economy, and America takes over for the colonial empire. This happens in a matter of 3 decades. You think it's by accident? Maybe. Maybe it's coincidence. But as my good friend and mentor Steve Bannon always says, there are no conspiracies, but there are no coincidences. By the end of World War II, America had taken over what was formerly known as the British colonial empire. And by way of, we defended all of these outposts, all of these British foreign policy outposts. Now, why am I saying that in respect to the managed decline of the West? Well, it's not the West. It's Europe. It's the managed decline of Europe. It's not the managed decline of America. America has everything it needs. And if you count South America and Central America as a Western Hemisphere, we have more than everything we need. You count Canada, we have more than everything we need. Europe is dependent. Europe is isolated. Europe has enemies on its borders from its history, from what it did in its British Empire and its global business. Not America. Great Britain has been fighting a war with the Russian Empire since the 1800s. The East India Trading Company goes back well before, so these things are not for America to own. You only would own them if you consider yourself European. And there are a lot of our political elites who do. Another idea, along with the idea of the post-World War II democratic liberal order, is the idea of being Atlantic power or being an Atlanticist. I'm not an Atlanticist. I'm an American nationalist.
So we have the Atlantic Council.
The Atlantic Charter.
Yeah.
This was the agreement between Winston Churchill and Theodore Roosevelt for the Americans to enter the war in World War II and help to fight off the Nazi war machine. And the part of that agreement was, Roosevelt told Churchill, you guys are going to relinquish your colonial empire. And they did it on paper, although all of these British colonies still bow to the Queen and they still give payment to the Queen. They're still tributary states, right? All of these colonial Commonwealth nations still exist, and they still bow and cry and throw petals every time that the royal family shows up. But they gave up their colonial empire on paper militarily, and we took it over. And the point of it is the West has been in decline since Henry Kissinger and the rest of his academic cohort told us that the only way to not have another world war was to entangle everybody's markets. But actually, it's made the economy and the buildup of the volcano and the climax even more dangerous. That's what's happened. The climax that's coming now is even more dangerous than where it was before. Because now nobody has a sense of independence. So now everybody's at really what happened is this, I'll say this. Really what happened is when you entangle everybody's markets and you bring people together at a United Nations and you get everybody sitting across from one another and mingling and talking, yeah, there's some sense of collaboration, but there's also a great sense of distrust. And people looking at each other like, I wonder if they're going to stab me in the back, or are we all working to the same interest? And you're seeing that play out now with Russia, where Russia's saying, no, we're taking our ball and we're going back home to Moscow and it's wartime. And you're seeing China make moves to do the same thing. And you're seeing a lot of the Arab nations make moves to do the same thing. We're on the brink now of another world war because we were told the only way to stave off war was to entangle everybody's markets, so everybody became dependent on one another. But that's dependent on trust. But you can't have a global collaboration where the norm and status quo is people lying to each other every day. And America never needed to be a part of it. That's my point. We were the big dog on the hill. We were the military might. Nobody wanted to go to war with us again after World War II. We didn't need to entangle our markets. We didn't need to entangle our food supply chains with Ukraine in order to feed people in America. That's ridiculous. But we've lived under that thinking since the 60s, really since 1945. We've lived under that line of thought. It was a lie then, it's a lie now, and Kamala Harris represents the same world order. And you could almost make the argument that they're pushing us towards a world war. And just as historical standards go, aren't wars quite profitable in the most general sense? Yes, they are. Great death, a lot of fatality, 75 million people lost in 6 years in World War II. But hey, no peace talks with the Russians. Let's just push it as far. Let's see how far it'll go. This is who these people are. They want to tell me they're doing it so black people in Flint, Michigan can be free, but they don't even have good drinking water still? Really? It's an insult. It's an insult to my intelligence, but it's really an insult to every American citizen here or anywhere else in the world.
Mike wants to jump in. He's got to go. So I just want to, 1 second.
Royce, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time with us. Sorry, there's a truck driving by. I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time with us. Something that was hoping to spark in terms of conversation. I can't really be there for all of it, but I'll stay on as long as I can. Is something that you and I talked about, and you may have already talked about this, but I wanted to sort of hear a little bit about how things have changed with regard to where you were at with Tayo, Daniel, and the 10K Foundation, where you two were at then, and how that's changed, evolved, and whatnot from then till now. And I mean, just because it allows us to show the difference between 4 years ago to
Nothing's changed with me. Nothing's changed with me and Tayo. Me and Tayo are still boys. We're still friends. I still consider him family. Love him to death. Seen him a number of times. Gave him a big hug. Call him, talk to him on the phone. We always had a relationship where we could call and talk to each other. We met in a very contentious way. I'll let him tell you the story if he wants to, but it's how sometimes people often meet. But me and him are good. I love him to death. I don't even think our where we are today is even intersects in many ways. I'm running for United States Senate. It's one of 100 United States senators in one of the most powerful government bodies in the history of human civilization.
Well, I think that's my question, actually, because naturally, in my mind, is that you all would be working, like in my mind, like when I first met you all, you guys were pretty close to the extent that you were working together on 10K.
Yeah.
But you have taken a different direction. So I guess
No, I didn't take a different direction. I'm still.
Wait, from 10K?
No, it's not. It's still the same mission. It's still the same mission. It's still the same. It's 10K. When you go back and you read the bio of 10K, I think it's still available. I'm locked out of the social media now. There were so many different people working the social media at that time. But if you go back and you read what the goal of 10K was or what the mission was, it says if you can mobilize 10,000 hopeful citizens, you can do anything. You can change anything. #sovereignty. The word sovereignty has gone missed in the story of 10K, but it was probably the most significant piece of the whole mission and the whole organization. Whether people knew it or not, I knew what it meant. There were some other people who didn't know what it meant. When we had a 30 by 30 foot canvas outside of the Federal Reserve that was painted all black with the word sovereignty in red and red ink, I knew exactly what it meant. And there were some other people out there who knew what it meant too. I guarantee you Bloomberg knew what it meant. I guarantee you the Wall Street Journal knew what it meant. I guarantee you the New York Times knew what it meant. I guarantee you guys knew what it meant. I guarantee your editors at PBS knew what it meant. They know what sovereignty means. They knew what it meant then and they know what it means now. So I haven't changed one bit.
No. Let's put it this way. I guess my question is, had you reached out to Tayo to join your campaign and work with you to build that out? How did that unfold? Yeah, so be more specific about your partnership.
Oh, yeah, I mean...
Theme and mission, like, we both...
Yeah, but when you say partnership, I mean, when you say partnership, you got to understand that the 10K Foundation was a number of people that came together who've known each other from the community for a long time. There was no real official or formal partnership. There was no structure of the organization. This was people going to or coming together who've known each other for many years and saying, this is as great a time as ever for us to stand together, support each other, collaborate, and try and sing from the same hymn book. And we did a great job. In fact, I think by many measures, we led one of the biggest protests in the country, one of the biggest demonstrations in the country, which was peaceful, by the way, at that time, and maybe in history. I think even the Minnesota History Museum has an exhibit and a picture of the protest that we led over Hennepin Bridge that had like 20,000 some people at it, which also was a stone's throw from the Federal Reserve, right? So, again, to describe it as a partnership, Tayo is Tayo, and I trust wherever Tayo is. Tayo's a good guy and he's doing good things. As far as being on the campaign, the way we approach the campaign is we let people reach out to us to volunteer. That's what makes my winning so significant. My winning is so significant because we didn't take any PAC money, special interest money, or lobby money, and I was still able to be nominated in a statewide Senate race, federal race, $150,000, and my opponent has an $18 million war chest, $6 million on hand. I think that tells you everything you need to know about her, but it also says a lot about me and what the people want now. The way we did that was we let people be a part of it who wanted to, who reached out. I didn't go ask any of my family members to be involved in the campaign. If they want to help and they want to be involved in what they hear and I want it to be genuine. If it's going to be genuine, they can reach out to us.
Can I ask as a side question, do you have like a campaign office or staff? Like, is there an operation like that?
No, we don't have a staff. We don't have any paid staff members. It's all volunteer. We want a statewide United States Senate race primary with $148,000 and all volunteer staff. That should be the headline. That should have been the headline of the New York Times. How in the hell did this crazy American far-right wing populace win a statewide Senate primary with $140,000 and nothing but volunteer staff? How did that happen?
That is impressive, Royce, I will say. So,
Especially, and
I really appreciate you, brother.
I'll say this to end, especially with all the neocon and rhino Republicans standing against us. And if there's one last thing that I'll say is a great sign of who Kamala Harris is, look at who's supporting her. Since when did Democrats and liberals pile up with George Bush, Dick Cheney, John McCain, and Mitt Romney? Since when did your average Democrat voter believe in the Iraq war or the Afghanistan war or our foreign policy there in the Middle East of funding both sides of the war or using our intelligence community to fund coups or regime changes there of terrorist organizations in the Middle East? I'm sure you know a lot about that being an Al Jazeera guy. Where did that become the norm in the Democrat Party? I'll tell you when. Right when it was most convenient for them. And we see every single one of these cowards for exactly who they are. They talk a lot about their ideas and their beliefs and their values and their ethics and their morals and their desire to see a better planet and a better society. But when the moment comes, when it's most convenient, they'll pile up with the most despicable people who they said were evil just yesteryear. Dick Cheney, warmongering, Halliburton, Dick Cheney, weapons of mass destruction, Dick Cheney, send our sons and daughters to go die on an Iraqi battlefield for weapons of mass destruction so him and his boys can turn a profit, Dick Cheney. And now today, they celebrate that he endorsed Kamala Harris. That tells you who she is. I guarantee you this, a Dick Cheney would never in a million years say anything positive about a Royce White. And it's not just him. It's him at that national, international level, but it's your Norm Colemans. It's your Norm Colemans and your Tim Pawlenty's right here in Minnesota. And since when did the Democrats start liking them? Something strange is going on here. And then when people say Trump derangement syndrome, I'm not saying it to people to be demeaning. I know it's controversial and it's intended to be pejorative, but I'm not saying it that way. I'm saying there is verifiable, measurable incoherence in the trajectory of people's political worldviews with regards to Donald Trump and everything they said they stood for. Since when do Democrats and liberals pal around with warmongering Dick Cheney? And that's why the theme of the campaign is border dead forever wars. Our country's bankrupt. Close our border. Stop getting involved in these wars.
I have two questions to ask for and then the last wrap up will be Chinling, my colleague.
Okay.
Has a couple questions.
Cool.
One question is kind of just, Tim Walz, he's on the national stage now, but he's from your home state. Do you see, if you were in public office, do you see any capacity to work with someone like him? And do you feel proud that someone from your state is, reaching that level?
No.
Thoughts on Tim Walz, yeah.
No, I'm not proud of Tim Walz at all. And I don't consider him to be from my state. He's from Nebraska. But, he's the governor. And, there's a reason why Kamala Harris picked him. He's shilling for the same sort of political status quo as she is. Even furthermore, he's a socialist, a self-described and admitted socialist. And in his mind, he thinks the American people are so stupid, or maybe he's so stupid, that socialism, Marxism, and communism aren't all from the same intellectual tradition. You got to be stupid to believe that. that there's different types of socialism and there's different types of communism and there's different types of Marxism. I mean, yeah, if you're an idiot, if you've been educated in a postmodern, Marxist, liberal-driven public school system or higher education system, sure, you may think that there is some nuance to the history of communism and Marxism and socialism, but there isn't. In fact, when we're talking about Wikipedia, if you put in Royce White, my Wikipedia pops up. If you put in communism, usually you'll find a page that talks about Marxism and socialism in the very opening stanza because they are so closely related. And to say that again, I go back to what I said earlier about the American people getting hit over the head 3 times financially. Imagine being Tim Waltz and making the claim that all of these migrants have to come to America because of how America has done business in that post-World War II democratic liberal order economic status quo. How we've done business, they've had to then leave their country and come to our country, but a lot of times they're fleeing socialist countries. Yeah, I mean, so if socialism, one man's socialism is another man's neighborliness, he must mean when somebody comes from a socialist country and then ends up being your neighbor, right? That's not what he meant. He meant socialism can be friendly. But what he really means is somebody coming from a socialist country could very quickly become your neighbor because that's how we want it to work. And yeah, I mean, when you have an $18 billion surplus and not a single penny of it is given back to the people, you're a communist. You think you can better decide how money is used. Totalitarianism, economic imperialism. These are the ideas people have to become familiar with. And whether they're familiar with them or not now, I'm 33. So they can either, I'll be around. They can jail me, they can censor me, or they can kill me. But other than that, the American people will always have an alternative option in American politics that will tell them the truth. It ain't Tim Waltz.
My last question, what is at stake in this election?
Everything's at stake in this election. Freedom, the idea of America, what it is, fundamentally. Are we a country that's a part of a broader global agenda to strip individuals of freedom and self-governance, of ownership? Or are we America, a nation of shopkeepers? A nation of shopkeepers and agrarian farmers, fortified and protected from economic imperialism by the Second Amendment. We get to decide who we are now. Make your choice, live with your decision.
So could I understand your worldview is that you think the World War II democratic liberal order has set blacks for failure? Is that a correct
It's not my view. It's a measurable fact. Blacks are failing in the post-World War II democratic liberal order.
And then did you hold this view when you in the past 4 years? Or
Yeah, that's why I led people to the Federal Reserve after George Floyd was killed. I said the way that the money works and the monetary policy is at the root of our problems, not the police precincts. The police are just workers. I mean, they're just working class citizens. They're just taking orders. They're not in charge of it. They're not in charge of how the system works. If you say the whole system is guilty, the police are a part of it, but they're not the main part of it. They're not the core part of it. They're definitely not the decision makers. If anything, they're the downstream organization and institution that has to take the shit that comes out of the system, that has to deal with all the shit that comes out of the system, and they do. And overall, they do a pretty good job en masse. And when they fail miserably, and there's great tragedy, they should be held accountable if the evidence suggests so. In that situation, I thought there was great evidence that he mistreated George Floyd on that day. And there were other extenuating circumstances as well that contributed to the outcome of that day. I think the trial for Derek Chauvin was political. I think he became a scapegoat. And I think the mainstream media kept the focus on Derek Chauvin and George Floyd intentionally. And they knew when I led people to the Federal Reserve that I was saying the entire structure of the post-World War II Democrat liberal order is failing black people and it's failing America. They knew exactly what I was saying and they chose not to acknowledge it anyway.
Chinley, can I ask that? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to ask your last question just so we can get him to look like more conversational style, unless you wanted to follow up about this at all. So we've covered this pretty thoroughly, but did you have a follow up on this?
Wait, are you asking me or?
Yeah, I'm asking you if you have any follow up on this before I ask your last question.
Oh yeah, I think my follow up for this is basically, I just want to make sure I understand. Basically, you have been consistent with this view ever since the beginning of the 10K Foundation.
Well, it depends. When you say consistent with the view, I've been consistent with this view since I was drafted into the NBA. The view of there being a problem with our global corporate community is something that I expressed back in 2012 when I fought the NBA on mental health policy. So this view has been consistent for the last 12 years, not the last 4 years. But if you wanted to take the George Floyd situation as a marker in time, leading people to the Federal Reserve is certainly saying that there's a problem with the post-World War II democratic liberal order, in my opinion.
That's my last question. So you believe Kamala Harris represents that liberal order, right?
Well, I don't believe that. I don't believe that Kamala Harris represents the liberal order. She says that she represents the liberal order. She talks about the liberal order in her speeches. She celebrates the liberal order and she vows to protect it. So I'm not saying it. It's another measurable fact.
The follow-up to that is that if that's what she represents, what order do you represent?
I don't represent any order. There is no. I represent Americanism. Yeah, the idea of American freedom, the United States Constitution, the ideas and the values and the ethics and morals of the Christian tradition, in the most fundamental sense. Yeah, the idea that you're a citizen. You're a citizen with rights that were granted to you inalienable by your creator, not your government. Your government's supposed to secure your rights, and right now they're not securing your rights. So I don't really represent an order so much as an idea or a set of ideas. When I say they represent an order, what I mean is they are a secret society. I'm not really a part of a secret society, at least it's not one that I'm aware of. I'm kind of as independent of a politician as you could be, in the sense that every one of these politicians, whether their backers agree on everything or not, they do have backers. They do have, verticals of donors and special interests. I don't have that. I'm just me. So I don't represent an order. Kamala does. Tim Walz does. They represent an order. They represent a secret society, a secret way of thinking and a secret way of operating. I don't. Everything about me is right out there on the table.
Is that the same for Trump, that he does not represent,
Well, like you said, and like the Russian guy said, and I gotta make a comment about this Russian thing, because I don't want this to be misconstrued either.
The Russian part comes from me, it doesn't come from you.
I got it, but I want to make a comment about the Russian thing, because I think it's important. If I get a chance to say something final, it'll probably be about the Russia-Ukraine war. But I think the Russian guy who made the comment about Donald Trump being Donald Trump and Kamala Harris representing an amalgamation of the Democrat platform is 100% spot on. And I think when you see Donald Trump, for the most part, you see a guy who's operating independently and because of it takes many slings and arrows from his own side of the aisle just as much as the other, demonstrated by people like Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney's support of his political opponent. So yeah, I think when you see Donald Trump, you're seen as genuine and authentic of an individual as we've seen in a long time. Right or wrong, whether you like him or love him, he's saying what he thinks. I don't really think he represents an order of any kind. If anything, I think most of the secret societies and special interests and lobbies and orders that exist share a common interest in not liking him, what he represents, what he's been able to do, and what he may do in the future.
I have to ask, because we just somehow didn't cover this. How do you feel about him having been convicted of a felony? How do you feel about this whole
Bears no
situation?
weight. Yeah, no. Donald Trump being convicted of a felony bears no weight on my support of him whatsoever. Again, I go back to the same point I've been making over and over. We were out there during 2020 after George Floyd died, and we said the whole system is guilty. An assumed premise in that phrase is that the criminal justice system is corrupt in any number of ways: economically, politically, culturally, racially, all kinds of ways. There's corruption in our criminal justice system. Now when Donald Trump gets convicted, I'm supposed to trust it? I must be stupid then, right? Maybe. I don't think so. I'm not gonna, well, here's what I'll say. I won't let any white liberals on CNN or MSNBC tell me I'm stupid. I won't let them infer that I'm stupid. And you could even pick some black liberals. I won't let Don Lemon or Joanne Reed tell me I'm stupid. I know better. I'm smarter than they are. It's stupid to think that you can convince every young black man or every American citizen that the system is guilty on one day, but tomorrow it's changed because it's advantageous for us. No, his convictions were clearly an example of one of the most ugly and disgusting things that's happened in this country and why this election is so consequential. Because the justice system is a fundamental pillar of American citizenship. And if we don't have justice, we have political lawfare, we don't have a country. Just like if we don't have a border. I should even add it to the theme. Border, debt, forever wars, lawfare. That's how important it is.
You're getting me all kinds of questions popping up in my mind.
Good.
Good.
Tell PBS we're going to do a 4-hour full-length interview on YouTube.
I mean, this is genuinely curiosity. So there's a couple things that come into my mind. One, I'll start with the less big topic first. Okay. Trump's handling of 2020.
Yes.
Looking back, what do you think about that?
Well, I don't know what more a man could say other than be peaceful. He said to be peaceful. The whole criticism of Donald Trump on January 6th is that he didn't do what they thought he should do. He's an American citizen, even as the president. He didn't have to do what we think he should do. In many cases, when you're president, you don't do what most people think you should do. That's kind of the job, is you have to weigh the decisions that most people will disagree or criticize. Specifically with January 6th, he said be peaceful. What else was he supposed to say? And when I hear people criticize and when I hear people frame it as insurrection, I can't help but think back to when I was leading peaceful demonstrations that could have easily gone violent, even though they didn't, fortunately, God willing. They didn't go violent, but they could have easily gone violent. And if they had gone violent, would they have said the same thing about me? Would they have said, you're responsible because you led these people here? Some people actually did try and say that. When the truck came onto the bridge on 35W, people said, you organized this, you were in charge of security. No, when you're an American citizen, you're in charge of your own security. That's fundamental to American citizenship. And the other point to be made about January 6th is the people get to decide what they want to do. They decided to let that intemperance manifest into breaching the Capitol. Now, whether you say they were justified or not, that's an argument that can be had, but they made that choice. Donald Trump can't be held responsible for everybody else's choices. There's nothing American about that. There's nothing in our legal precedents or justice system about that. If I tell you, if I tell you, don't go kill anybody, and in your mind, you twist those words or you start to make some inference that I should anyway, am I going to be brought in court and held responsible for you killing somebody? That's ridiculous. Maybe. I mean, it depends on what prosecutor you get. Depends on what Kamala Harris or Amy Klobuchar you get. Maybe. Those prosecutors have a lot of power. Remember that? Didn't Kamala Harris say? Prosecutors got a unique power in this country. With the stroke of my pen, I could bring charges even though I know I'm going to drop them in the future. This is out of Kamala Harris's own mouth. Do you know how insulting it is? Do you know how insulting it is as a young black man who has experienced prosecutorial misconduct in this country, personally and as a witness? Do you know how offensive it is to expect that any black man in this country would vote for somebody who defended or bragged about or casually discussed the corruption, the power of a prosecutor to unjustly bring charges against a citizen, knowing full well they don't have the evidence to prosecute and anticipate and plan to drop those charges later for whatever political strategy they're working? Do you know how offensive that is? So yeah, when I see Donald Trump being brought up on convictions related to January 6th or anything else, I think to myself, isn't it strange? Isn't it a strange coincidence that his opponent is a prosecutor?
To clarify, I'm also curious not just about January 6th, but also 2020, George Floyd,
Yeah.
COVID, everything. How do you reflect on his performance for that too?
Well, actually, look, my only problem with Donald Trump, and I tweeted once something that people find great contradiction in around the George Floyd situation. And it was when the discussion happened about sending the military in, the United States military. And I think there was a rumor floating around, or maybe Donald Trump had made comments about sending the military in. And at the time, I didn't really know whether or not he was distinguishing between the United States military and the National Guard. I mean, and that's one of those tricky, blurry lines of, is the National Guard actually the United States military or not? But at the time, I didn't view the comment as him saying the National Guard. I thought he meant the United States military. Well, me being the anti-war hawk conspiracy theorist that I am about American intelligence communities and our military industrial complex, in my mind, I'm going, how dare you say you're sending the military in to the city when I'm organizing peaceful demonstrations? Aren't you seeing these peaceful demonstrations? So it's kind of a cry out for the media to acknowledge that, yeah, there were bad things happening in Minneapolis, but there were also some people on the ground doing some very good and positive things as well. But outside of that, I had no problem with Donald Trump. Never have, really. And in fact, even going back to 2016, if you had the chance to ask some of my family, they'll tell you I was saying Hillary Clinton's full of it back then in 2016. But to answer your question about, the pandemic, what really opened my eyes was COVID. COVID opened my eyes a great deal. I mean, I already had known that there was corporate corruption and that the media was slanted for their own interests because of my situation with the NBA, and nobody wanted to rub the NBA the wrong way because it's a cash cow, right? Nobody wanted their credentials taken, their media credentials. That's a real thing. You know how it is. Nobody wanted to get their media credentials revoked for drawing a real story with some stark criticism against the NBA's structural policy, white as they are. Nobody wanted to do that. So I already knew the media was corrupt. I already had a problem with the media. But I never in a million years thought that I would see what happened during COVID. The level of lies and deception that took place during COVID is probably one of the most despicable things I can even reference in the history of human civilization, in terms of the government and the media collaborating to push a false narrative. I've never seen anything, in my 33 years, I've never seen anything like it, but I've never even read of anything like it, other than when you go back to communist state-controlled Russian media, and now state-controlled Chinese Communist Party media. But I never witnessed anything like it. Yeah, COVID changed a lot for a lot of people.
My last question. Very last question, unless you have anything you want to throw out there, Mark. But basically, it's interesting to me that both sides, insofar as there is, at least on the surface sides, feel that this election is existential. So you talk to someone that's deep blue,
yeah,
and they say Donald Trump getting elected is the end of American democracy. That's
right.
it. And you talk to someone that's on the MAGA side, and they say Trump losing is potentially because it's rigged, or for other reasons, because Harris is a communist Marxist. That's also an existential. So whichever way you cut it, it seems that we are in an existential moment.
Yes, yeah, we are.
What does it look like when the losing side, and there has to be one?
I'd say, well, first off, I'd say both sides are lying. I call BS on both sides. Yeah, we've already lost our country to communism, and we were never a democracy. So both sides are lying. Still is an existential moment, but not for the reasons they say. Yeah, we've already lost it. For the people on the Trump side, they better be clear that we've already lost this country. And for the people that say we're going to lose our democracy, we never were a democracy. We were the democratic liberal order. We were defending the British Empire and the idea of global government. We were never a democracy. That was a lie. So both sides are lying, and the consequence is If both people continue to lie, we'll continue to be divided, and it's more likely that the people who set this whole plan in motion will find success.
Anything else that you want to add before we finish?
Yeah, I got to say something about the Russian thing.
Yeah,
I can't not let that slide. Listen, I started to go into it earlier, but I might have gotten sidetracked. But yeah, because I think I started talking about Mackinder's land theory.
Yes.
To go back to Mackinder's land theory, one of the significant ideas in his theory were the theaters that would play out to decide control of the Eurasian world island. One of those theaters was the Heartland. Another theater was the Sino-Japanese and Russo alliance. Another theater was the German and Russo potential alliance, right? Great Britain didn't want the Russians and the Germans to work together, to team up, because it would have been a problem for the British Empire. They also didn't want the Russians and the Japanese at the time, because they were the prominent power in the Indo-Pacific. They didn't want them to join or be allied, okay? Or that Russia would take over the German alliance, overthrow Germany, and the whole Germanic controlled area would become a Russo-controlled area, a Russian-controlled area. So a huge part of the way the whole geopolitical landscape is structured today stems all the way back to Great Britain's foreign policy and intellectual tradition, academic tradition regarding the Russian Empire. This stems well before the Soviet Union. This stems well before the fall of the Soviet Union. This is well before Vladimir Putin. He understands this history, but this is so much deeper than people understand or readily know about. The British Empire and the Russian Empire have been fighting a war since the early 1800s and even before that. So when our academic universities talk or preach about white supremacy and neocolonialism and this sort of Western arrogance that we get to tell other people how to live, we think ourselves better than everyone else. Isn't that exemplified when we tell Vladimir Putin he should allow us to put our weapons on the borders of his country when we wouldn't let him do the same to ours? I mean, isn't that really the height of Western arrogance for us to say we would never let Russia put small tactical arms in Canada or Mexico or Cuba, as already happened in the past, or the Bahamas or wherever? We would never be comfortable with Russia or China, or let's say Iran, to put small tactical arms that close to our border. But Vladimir Putin should let us put our weapons on his? That's Western arrogance. That's us playing empire. That's us saying your culture is a myth and my culture is the truth, right? And so, but to what end is my point? To what end? What's the path to victory? You know, we're here in an election and we got CNN and MSNBC and Fox News and everybody puts up their electoral maps and say, here, click, click, click. What's the path to victory? Draw up that world map and have some of these international dignitaries like Bob Keegan and Victoria Nuland tell us what's the path to a victory against the Russians. Well, actually, they already have. They've said it. They said that victory against Russia is for Russia to leave every territory that they've occupied that's considered to be Ukraine territory, including Crimea. That is their standard of victory in this situation. So they're basically saying we're going to see if he'll nuke us. We're calling Vladimir Putin's bluff, and we'll see if he'll use a small tactical nukes. He already called their bluff once. Remember when Joe Biden said we're going to take him off the SWIFT system, and he's going to feel the punch of our economic might, of the post-World War II democratic liberal orders, restructure global economy. He's going to feel that post-World War II democratic liberal order. We're taking him off the SWIFT banking system. And he laughed. He went, you think that's going to stop me? Did it stop him? That was 2 years ago when he invaded. 2 weeks after the invasion, Joe Biden's going up on the podium saying, when we take him off the SWIFT banking system, he's not going to be able to operate. Little did we know, I guess, as the American people, that the entire BRIC alliance and many other disaffected countries out there on the world stage with the post-World War II democratic liberal orders Ponzi scheme were ready to back up Vladimir Putin in his play. They were still going to take Russian oil. So, either these people really want us to go into a full-blown kinetic war with Russia, which has been the pipe dream of many of them for a long time, especially Zbigniew Brzezinski, especially Mika's dad, Zbigniew. Oh, he was an extreme anti-Russian Pope, he was Polish, right? I mean, he was virulently anti-Russian in his worldview. You're going to take us to a nuclear war, or what's the alternative here? Either you're trying to take us to a war or you're just radically incompetent. And the other answer is, again, like I said earlier, never forget, although World War I and World War II were extremely devastating from a human fatality standpoint, they were also extremely profitable. And so the plan may very well be, we'll provoke a war and we'll try to find a way to use it to our advantage in the future. And we all know that a great strategy of people is sometimes to burn down what exists so they can build it back up from scratch. That certainly seems to be what's happening there in Gaza, ain't it? Do they have plans for Gaza to be a great new beautiful port of trade and commerce? You got to dig a little deep to find that white paper, but it's in there. Oh, you can go find it. See, this is why the mainstream media doesn't interview me. This is why Joya and Reed and Mika Brzezinski would never have me on, because these are the real things that are going on out there on the world stage. There's plans right now to turn Gaza, destroyed under the rubble Gaza, which if nothing else, no matter where you fall on this Israel-Palestine thing, Jews and Palestinians, no matter what, Jewish Arabs, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, no matter where you fall on that, because there are holy wars. We know that since time immemorial. But no matter where you fall on this war, what has happened in Gaza is a great tragedy. Okay? It's a tragedy for everybody. Even many Jews who are pro-Israel and anti-Hamas or let's say believe in what the effort is there in Palestine, even they would say it's tragic that this has to happen. Now, whether it has to happen or not is a debate, but even they would say it's tragic, okay? The last thing we should do is turn Gaza, rubble Gaza, into some shining, crowning new jewel of some global corporate pipe dream. If it's gonna be rubble and dead bodies, let them sit, pay them some respect. Don't build any corporate greed on top of it in the wake of it. That's disgusting. It was disgusting for me to read that they plan on, rebuilding Gaza into some beautiful new port, but they plan to do the same thing with Ukraine. What about Zelensky marshaling over here and all of these corporate leaders going to meet with him and saying, we got the contracts to build back. This is exactly what happened in Nazi Germany. I hate to go back to the history. And I know that's why people don't want me in office, because I'm going to tell you the way things really are. I can't help myself. Sorry. They can kill me if they want to. But this is what happened in Nazi Germany. After World War I, the German economy was in ruin, and they were made to pay reparations to the other European countries for their role in World War I. And American Wall Street financiers and other European financiers, we agreed to pay Germany's part of the reparations back for them. We loaned them the money, basically, right? And then when our economy hit turbulent times here in America at the start of the Great Depression, we called in the loans on Germany. We said, we'll pay back your reparations. Then we called in the loans, and that's exactly what Adolf Hitler used to raise the Nazi Party around economic instability. It's exactly what he used. He said, these Jewish bankers and their international influence and those Americans, those Westerners, have all set us on a track for economic chaos and failure. And in great part, it was true. And they say behind the biggest lies, there are great truths. And that was a great truth right there. But my point is, they plan to do the same thing. They're saying it. The Ukraine's going to go up in smoke because Russia at some point is going to blow it to smithereens. They have no choice. At some point there in Gaza, Israel's going to say we've had enough, and there's going to be a full-blown kinetic conflict. And we'll go in behind it and rebuild the same corporate greed that caused the problem in the first place. If that's the type of status quo the American people want, make your decision and live with your decision. But don't tell me you're a humanitarian. Don't tell me you care about democracy or freedom. Don't tell me you care about well-being and prosperity. Because I know you're lying to yourself. I'm not going to let you lie to me. Lie to yourself, but I'm not accepting it.
Mark?
I think I know the answer to this, but have you had the opportunity to meet with former President Trump?
Have I had the opportunity? I think I've had the opportunity a number of times, and I didn't get a chance to. I was invited by numerous people to Mar-a-Lago. At the time, my schedule didn't work out and go. I know everybody would love to go and meet Trump and bow at the throne. And I love what Trump is doing, and I support him 100,000%. But at the time, it just didn't work out for my schedule, and I didn't get the chance to. I tell you one thing, when he almost got shot, I immediately regretted not going to go meet him, right? I mean, when he almost was killed, I was like, oh man, what was I thinking? I should have went to Mar-a-Lago. But I've never been that guy, because I'm not doing it for the attaboys, from him or anybody else. My following and support of Donald Trump isn't about him as a character. He's not a character in my political pipe dreams. It's the ideas that he represents. So, when I get a chance to meet him, hopefully I'll be getting sworn into the United States Senate, and he'll be getting sworn in as the next president. And we'll get to work there in D.C., and I'm sure we'll meet then. We'll meet on the other side of the finish line, or maybe he and I are thrown into the same gulag, because that's surely on the table as well for anybody now who speaks the truth.
You mentioned the support in this. When you answer, just pretend like
Okay.
this is the question.
Got it.
The support you've gotten from people in this state, volunteers, donations,
Yeah.
your campaign. What do people tell you when you have conversations with folks when you're campaigning, you're at events?
Well, a lot of the supporters and positive feedback. A lot of the support and positive feedback here on the campaign trail in Minnesota is we learn a lot when we listen to you, when we come see you talk. We walk away learning something, and people like that. Now, sometimes I challenge people in a way that is uncomfortable for their prejudgments and whatever former knowledge they had coming into the event. But I think people see my candidacy and the things I talk about as being honest and genuine, and I'm proud of that, and I'm happy about that. I'm happy that despite my contempt for the broader American public and their commitment to know the truth, to not be lied to, I do get some in-person reassurance that there are people out there that are looking for the truth, and they respect the truth, and they appreciate people who speak the truth. So that's been the most of what we hear out on the campaign trail. We like what you're saying. We like what you're saying. We like that you're not afraid. Keep going, even if you don't win. We need people like you in this country. You can articulate things that I'm thinking, but I don't necessarily know how to say, or I don't have the platform to say. And I hope I do them justice. That's a heavy burden to carry, to speak to the grievances and the concerns of people who you've never even met before.
You mentioned the things you're talking about now. You said you've been talking about them for a long time, before 2020.
Yeah.
You decided to run for Senate.
Yeah.
How do people, I guess, do people seem surprised that you're the person nominated by the Republican Party for Senate?
That's an interesting question. I think some people are surprised that I want to nominate. Look, here's what I think. I think the NBA did such a good job of collaborating with their mainstream media allies when I fought them on policy, of misrepresenting me as somebody who's crazy or just scared to fly. Your average American citizen who may casually remember my name or the story in the NBA never really got a good chance to hear me talk about things in depth, even at that age. If they had, and the people who did at that time, always said that it was in my future to either be on radio or on television or to run for office. That might say something bad about the nature of American politics, but the people who knew me in depth then wouldn't be surprised by me winning the nomination now. This is just par for the course of what a lot of those people saw for my future. And I get a lot of people who say you could be president one day. You know, I get a lot of people who come up after they hear me, Republican or Democrat or independent, or young people who are going to vote for the first time saying, man, you could actually be president one day. I'd vote for you to run for president. So some people aren't surprised. A good portion of people are surprised because the mainstream media is so effective. And they only know me from the headlines. Which is why I push so hard to have the full interview up, right? Because PBS has that kind of audience. And people are credentialized under the PBS banner in more long format of understanding who people really are and how they think. And every time the mainstream media decides to pigeonhole and cut down what somebody says or who somebody is, we leave this huge gap in the American mind and the American awareness of their leaders and who their leaders really are or who their leaders should be. And I'm not saying I should be their leader, but what I'm saying is I'm certainly a lot more honest and genuine than many of the people who have been in leadership up until now. And it would be a shock to some people. I would assume a lot of people look at it and they go, the only reason that they nominate him is because 80,000 Republicans in Minnesota are crazy conspiracy theorists. And it's like, if you can, well, that's what they say in the mainstream media, actually. That's what they've been told. The mainstream media says Royce White represents a dangerous evolution and movement of the Republican Party nationally. So a lot of people who just read those headlines would think, yeah, I mean, you know, Royce has nothing important to say or nothing of value to say. You know, even though we love black men, we want to protect them, their lives matter, but this black man doesn't have anything important to say. He's just garnered the support of a bunch of other Republican crazies. But these people are kind people. They live on farms. I mean, they live off the land. You know, the weather changes whether or not they have a successful year economically and substantively, right? I mean, these are humble people, a lot of these people. Are there some crazies in the Republican Party? Yeah, I think Dick Cheney's one of them. but you know, are there some schizophrenic conspiracy theorists in the party? Of course, they're in the Democrat Party as well. That's a symptom of our society writ large. But the vast majority of people who support me and support Donald Trump, they really mean America first. Can we stop sending our money to all of these foreign ventures and foreign wars? And you know, could we get some money there to Flint to finally fix the water system? Could we get some money to our American farmers so they don't have to keep getting subsidized by the Black Rocks and sold out to the Chinese buyers? So can we make it so that the farmers, the American farmers, can pass down their farms to their children without paying an exorbitant tax? When we say foundation American values, when we say that this is a nation of shopkeepers and agrarian farmers, we want American farmers to pass their farms down to their children. That's a part of the fabric of our American culture. And you know, these are things that the Republican Party, the new Republican Party, is built on. It's not built on character, character gossip and innuendo and WWE headlines. These people aren't stupid. They know what's happening to them in their country. They're smart enough to be curious, and they were determined enough to figure it out, to piece it together, and they're brave enough to say it, and they're brave enough to let their vote and do the speaking. So the fact that I was able to win isn't a symptom of the Republican Party going crazy. These people have a problem with the status quo, and their answer could be radical if we don't change it, voluntarily. So,
at this moment, you've got arguably, I think, the largest platform you've had since you stepped away from professional sports.
Yeah.
And with the sport you've got, how do you feel? How does that feel as a human being? Do you feel vindicated? Do you feel
Well, I mean, I was vindicated in the sense of my professional sports career. I was vindicated the day Kevin Love came out and said that he was suffering from panic attacks. And then DeMar DeRozan said he was suffering from depression. And then what coincided after that was a windfall of other NBA participants, coaches, refs, GMs, players that all said they were suffering from mental health conditions too. And then after that, a policy was put into the collective bargaining agreement formally, which stated that every team was mandated to have a mental health professional staffed at all times. So I was vindicated then. I would say the vindication now stems back to 2020, right? The vindication of my political ascent stems back to 2020. That you don't have to have the support of the mainstream media. You don't have to have special interests and lobbyists who are supporting you or backing you to speak an uncomfortable truth and find success with the people. There's nothing more American actually than my success in politics, because I've rejected every corrupt influence of money I possibly could, and I've still found success. Now, how far that success will go is to be determined. But the success I've had already up until this point, I'm proud to be an American, and I'm proud of the American people, and I'm proud of the Minnesotans, the Minnesota Republicans that nominated me, because they had every incentive not to. They could listen to all the gossip about child support or FEC violations or whatever else. Me saying that women are mouthy, which, by the way, is a manipulation and misuse of the women of the female identity. It's trying to misuse women and manipulate women. There are some women who are mouthy, not all women, but the women who are mouthy, they are women. Just like there are some men who are mouthy, not all men, but some, and the ones who are, they're men. So there's nothing wrong with saying that, in my opinion. But that was used as a caricature of the Republican Party and the MAGA movement to be hostile towards women. And it totally disenfranchises or dismisses all the women who support me or who support Trump. Like they're not women, or they don't exist, or their opinion doesn't count. Same thing they think about black people. Your opinion doesn't count, you don't count if you don't agree. And for that reason, because that's a cultural norm, my success now is a vindication of 2020 and George Floyd. Because I was there when all those people said Black Lives Matter, until you disagree. If you disagree, you don't matter so much anymore.
Which is a double standard that you see play out quite often in different contexts.
Yeah. Well, look at Trump. Trump's a great example of the double standard. They all loved him when he was giving money to the Democrats or raising money for the Democrats. They all had him on their shows, Oprah. They all invited him to all of the galas and all of the banquets. They all wrote him letters and said how thankful they were for his friendship. And then he challenged the post-World War II Democratic liberal order, and he became enemy number one, so much so that it's okay to kill him. We had Democrats actually say they wish he would have been shot and killed. That's how divisive and polarized the conversation. We're actually wishing death on people. I can't name one person. There's not one person I could think of in the society, in some general, vague political context, that I would say I hope dies. Like, I don't hope Kamala Harris dies. I don't hope Barack Obama dies. I don't wish death on Hillary Clinton or Bill Clinton. I don't wish death on George Bush or Dick Cheney. And they are all a part of the same order. That's why I mentioned them in conjunction. But there's nobody who I wish death on. Something dark and pernicious has happened in our American political culture. And I would say it's because too many American leaders, candidates, spokespeople, thought leaders, academics, so on and so forth, too many of them have willingly taken the gain of the decay in our conversation. Too many have advantageously accepted the gain of the decadence in our conversation. And so now it's gotten to a level where people are, angry, emotional, passionate. We fomented hatred, we have, just based on division, not so much the ideas, because again, most people don't even really understand the ideas at an academic level. But at least on the surface, I think this way, you think this way, so it's right to kill each other. As a black man, this insults me. As a black man, where two black kids on your average street in any American city on any day of the week could shoot each other, could kill each other over a difference of opinion, I guess that reflects the broader and greater American political culture, doesn't it?
That's everything I have.
We're good. I think we also covered about 5 times more than I
Good.